And we're back.
Welcome to episode 241 of No Direction, the No Direction Network's Pathfinder news, reviews, and interviews podcast. I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Baron.
Last week, Paizo introduced us to the early versions of 2E's newest classes, the Gunslinger and the Inventor. And shockingly, we are nearing the halfway point of the Pathfinder Guns and Gears playtest, which ends on February 5th.
This is a rapid playtest.
Right? Rapid fire. Here to talk about the classes that are scheduled for the September 2021 hardcover, which also feels like it's right around the corner. We have Paizo Design Manager, Mark Seifter. Michael, welcome back, Mark.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
We're glad to have you here all the time. And new Pathfinder designer, Micheal Sayre. Hello, Michael. Mike.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
We're also happy to have you. Maybe not as happy as Mark, I'm just saying. We have more history with Mark as well.
That's fair. That's fair.
Well, congratulations on the move.
Thank you.
Yeah, normally we would spend a little bit of time being like, hey, you're a designer now. What's that like? How are you doing? What have you been up to? But we don't have time today. We have a lot to get into. Because on top of all of this, we've got a packed news segment that will be following this. So if you feel like we're kicking you out in about an hour and a half, that's why. But
that's
we are
okay.
going to do our
Mike
best.
has a playtest that is after this too, so he would have needed to leave anyway.
Perfect.
Yep. At least it's good news. It's mostly all good news. So I'm happy for good news.
Yeah, right. I need good news right about now. I'm very happy.
Well, I think a lot of people took Pathfinder Guns and Gears as good news. It was not. It was not what everybody was expecting. It's very different from any other book we've seen for 2E, and really, we haven't even seen something specifically like that for 1E. So, what was the thinking behind Guns and Gears, and why is 2021 the year for that book?
So Mike is the lead for Guns and Gears, the design lead. It's different than being a lead designer, which is just a title people have overall. It's a per product basis. So I'm going to let Mike field anything that's about the book in general and focus my answers more on the Inventor class.
So Guns and Gears is something that actually has been in the works for at least a year. I'm trying to remember the first meeting where it came up and we figured out that these were going to be the two classes that were going to be in there. But we all kind of figured it out. Getting the Gunslinger and guns in the game was kind of a big thing because pretty much the day that Pathfinder 2nd edition was announced, people were like, guns? So we knew we could only wait so long on that. And then I think another thing is there's a lot of us at Paizo who weren't at Paizo 5 years ago, right? There's the staff has blown up a lot. There's a lot of additional people. And I think that also creates a lot of energy where we're like, more new stuff, okay, we've got these new archetypes. This is cool. Let's do the next level. Let's do a class we've never had in the game before. And so I think that combination of wanting to do something new, knowing that we needed guns in the game, that was the seed that kind of grew into Guns and Gears. So,
and the fact that the first new class, the Inventor, has a class feature called Innovation, is there something baked in there? Is there something subconscious going on?
That's not really an Easter egg to the fact that it's a new class. It's more of just inventors innovate. They create something brand new. It's more of that. But Guns and Gears has definitely had, like Mike said, a very interesting path, not the least of which because of the fact that it was originally going to be a book that potentially had a design lead of Liz, but she left the company and she had already done most of the design leading for Bestiary 3 by that point, but not very much for Guns and Gears. And so when Mike joined on, he joined on during a process where he pretty much had to go like with the fire hose and take this this whole process and hit the ground running immediately in a way that we have not ever had, and like, sorry Mike, and hopefully never will again, forced a new employee to do. And he's done a really good job at outlining and getting this book forward and concepting it, bringing it from like the dreams and vague meetings we had with cool ideas of stuff into like an actual book.
Now, one of the things I'm really curious about from the high level of this book that I'm super hype about, but during the early days of Pathfinder, when we were talking with a lot of people working on the settings, such as James Jacobs and them, it was always like, they were very clear that like the pirates don't have cannons and guns are silly rare, and clockwork isn't a thing they really want in this setting. And this seems to be a big nope to all of those early assumptions about the setting. And honestly, the world has been sort of shifting in this direction for a long time now. But in that view, how do you think that this book changes from some of those earliest days visions of the campaign setting?
I don't think it's a revolution. It's more of an advancement. There have been catastrophe. Yeah, exactly. There's been catastrophe after catastrophe hitting this poor world every 6 months whenever there's an AP. And among the things that happens is heroes gather from a lot of places, knowledge, information, and abilities are spreading and spreading. You can even see it if you check Lost Omens World Guide or some of the other Lost Omens about how some of that gun technology, some of those things have been spreading. And at the risk of spoilers for Shattered Star, so turn off for like a few seconds and I'll wave my hand when it's done. But Zin, the Emperor of Thassalan, was one of the main like clockwork people from back many thousands of years ago, and that information is just spread around. There's a clockwork cathedral that's been trying to research that in Absalom, which is a hub city. So there's a lot that's been going on in the APs that has worked to sort of lead that forward. I'm gonna wave my hand.
Feels like you went pretty far out of your way to excuse why your pirates have cannons now. But I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And, you know, pirates having cannons is a thing that, like, is an intentional evolution, right? We talk about it in Guns and Gears. There's a whole section that's talking about, hey, there's a new hurricane queen in the shackles, and she's been ripping off merchant ships that are, you know, traveling from Alkenstar to other places. She's been going after everything she can to get her hands on these things, and it's interacting with other parts of the world, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that in this book. That's not the focus of this book, right? But if you think about like how the core rulebook has those flash sections for the Age of Lost Omens, where it's a page here about this is what's going on in this part of the world. It's a little bit more than that, but a little bit more in that vein than what you would see in like a Lost Omens book, right? Where we talk about how this stuff is contextualized in the world. Because the same way you're asking those questions, we know that's what the fans are going to ask, you know, is where are these things coming from? How are they getting from one part of the game to the other? And so Guns and Gears, in addition to bringing in all of this cool stuff, is going to try and answer maybe not as many of those questions as it can, but as many of the ones that are really pertinent and that'll get you going so that we can dive into them even deeper in later books, right?
And actually, I really appreciate that explanation, because it kind of mirrors technological advancements in reality, when, like, you know, after the World Wars, you had massive cultural cross sections and massive technological advances.
Yeah, for sure.
You mentioned the Lost Omens line, and honestly, if you had put Ancestry Guide and Guns and Gears in front of me and said one of these is Lost Omens and one of them is the hardcover line, I would get it wrong, even if you gave it two chances. So what made this a Pathfinder RPG hardcover rather than a Lost Omens one?
I think one of the answers to that is there's two classes in it, right? And classes are something that's kind of the design team's bread and butter. There's not going to be a class that we're going to put out that doesn't have a designer anchoring it, right? That's because they're so, even with these classes where we've got that uncommon tag, which we'll probably get to at some point in this conversation, even with that, these are still, you know, these kind of part of that cornerstone of the game. Everything that happens at the table is going to roll out of one of two sources, right? Classes or a bestiary. So it's that alone is enough to really put it in our ballpark. But I think in addition to that, there's just going to be so much gear in this. There's going to be new types of weapons that we've never had before. There's going to be new types of vehicles. There's going to be all of this stuff. And so that really just kind of demands that you have the design team there in the middle of it as we're innovating all of these new mechanics and stuff. Whereas Ancestries, while they are complex and they can bring in a lot of new stuff, at this point in time, they're better templated, right? Like we know how to do an Ancestry. We've got, I think already something like 16, maybe more than that, examples of Ancestries in play. So
Mike is right in everything that he said, but it is also true, Ryan, that Ancestry Guide is like drastically on the rulesier side of the kind of thing that you would see in the Lost Omens line too. So you wouldn't, I think, you know, you would be excused for thinking, well, maybe both of those were things on the rules line that I was hearing about in the RPG line. It just turns out that this year there were some extremely heavy design lifts in the Lost Omens line as well.
So we are about ready to move on to the playtest document. Before we completely leave the just talking about broadly about Guns and Gears, we should give the audience a chance to ask their questions. Speaking of which, Param, how do people ask questions during the live episode of No Direction?
Well, because every single episode of No Direction is recorded live in front of a Twitch audience. Join us at twitch.tv/No Direction, where you can chat with us and ask questions to the hosts and our guests throughout the show. We'll be collecting those questions and filtering them onto our guests as we can.
So we do already have a couple of questions and comments about vehicles, and I do want to spend a little time on there. ZergTitan99 is saying hot rod chariots. We'll put a pin in that while I move on to Mirrorwolf9 saying, gimme airships being more prevalent in the setting. So both of the vehicle suggestions are a little bit more on the wacky Masters of the Universe side of vehicles. Is that what we're getting, or are we just getting chariots? What are you doing there?
I want the giant club vehicle.
Oh, it's like, was it a big skeleton thing that had a...
It had a big orange ball on a stick. It would go slam. I don't know what else it was called. I'm sorry.
It's called Slamor.
It's just my favorite toy.
So airships are something we already introduced in the Game Mastery Guide, right? That was the first time that airships appeared for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Those are something where I think we still want them to be big event moments when an airship comes into play, right? Galarian isn't suddenly, you know, late 2021 going to have sky pirates everywhere. But, you know, maybe at some point in time we do a cool adventure where, like, you have to go fight the Hurricane Queen as she's outfitting a ship to turn it into an airship, or you've got to, you know, go chase somebody down, you know, up in Ustalav, and suddenly an airship rowed by electrically stimulated undead arms just takes up out of the earth, right? There's all of these cool things you can do with it where you can make it a part of the game world in a big way without making it the focus of the game world. And I think that's where you're going to see from these vehicles. They're going to add cool flavor to different parts of the world. They might even let you do something that you couldn't necessarily do before. But I think technology-wise, you're talking about closer to Avatar: The Last Airbender than The Legend of Korra, right? Original series, not so much the second later series.
So right. Are we getting gliders?
I did. Well,
you never know. But if you look at the Airship and Game Mastery Guide, it's listed as rare, right? It's not even uncommon like the Inventor and the Gunslinger. It's rarer than that. So like Mike gave an exact, very in-depth explanation of something that kind of comes out to it's pretty rare. It's going to be there for the purpose of a specific story, but not just like everywhere, even in certain sections of the world.
Well, that's a good segue over to talking about these classes, and more specifically, uncommon classes, giant big question mark. What does that mean?
Well, if you read the playtest there, I actually took the time to write a really long paragraph about it. But we're also
yeah, but we're a podcast,
here, so maybe I'll talk about it. So the answer to that is that we've got this rarity system in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, right? And you've got common, uncommon, rare, and unique. And the further away from common you go on that list, what we're basically saying is there are fewer of these in the world, right? From common to uncommon, there's probably still a good chance that in any like major settlement, you might run into somebody who knows an uncommon feat or has an uncommon item or weapon or something like that. You know, you get into rare, if somebody has it, it's because they went questing for it, right? That was the penultimate achievement. The thing they got before they went and beat the boss almost, right? Is where you kind of see rare stuff coming into play. And then unique means there's one in the world. So these are uncommon, which means there's still a good chance if you're strolling through Absalom that you're going to see an inventor on the street or a gunslinger, looking for work. But you're not guaranteed to run into them anywhere. And as a player, that also means that you need to ask your GM, hey, is this appropriate for your game world? Is this something that I can come and bring into the session? And that's what that does, is it serves to tell you about the setting. And then it also serves to give GMs a little bit of a backboard to when they approach the game. When we put the fighter in a book, we assume that GMs are going to say yes to the fighter, right? You're just going to have fighters. The gunslingers and the inventor, they might not be right for every GM. And in as much as we want to talk about what's appropriate to the game world, we also want to give them as many tools as they have to kind of identify what is in the game and how it works with the game that they want to run.
Right. Like, imagine back in Pathfinder First Edition, some of those books like horror adventures with the corruptions or occult adventures with all those psychic duels and other occult options. Imagine that rarity existed back then, and we could have signposted certain things as being uncommon or rare to help players and GMs decide and learn about adopting them in the game. Instead, sort of, there was no guidance on that, and so some people would just like, I don't want this at all, this is too much, and some people just threw all of it in. And just having uncommon or rare or unique still lets you throw all of it in if that's what you want to do. Or say, no, this is not for me, but it gives you sort of a better sense of how and where to include things in the game and can allow players and GMs to build up expectations together.
Has there been any reaction to having uncommon classes?
Barely. I've seen a few people who said, like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Or even people who were like, saying that they kind of were dreading when this stuff would get in the game because they felt like it was a genre that they wanted to be sequestered in some ways. And they're like, oh, but it's uncommon, and that means that I can make sure that it is. And most other people just didn't talk about it that much.
So my big concern with the label is, how's this going to apply? Like, have you all been already communicating with the organized play crew about whether or not these will even be allowed?
You've got the former Pathfinder Society developer and the design lead for organized play here. We've been in communication. They know what's up. They know what's going on. And Thirsty and Linda have very good ideas that I think people are going to like. And we're not going to say anything about what they are because that's their thing to just talk about and to continue deciding as the playtest goes on and not have like forced upon them any restrictions from us saying things.
Yeah. But literally since the literally since the moment I started outlining this book, I've been talking to organized play about, how is all of this going to work? What is the best way that I can frame this stuff for you? Because organized play really does bear a lot of the brunt of access, right?
Right.
A GM is going to kind of off the cuff it like, oh, it's uncommon, thanks for asking, yes or no, right? Like, it'll be pretty quick for them. But organized play needs a lot more involvement in those kind of conversations. And so doing things on our end to frame this stuff in a way that is going to make it as easy for them as they want it to be to get in and use this stuff is something that has very much been a goal and a part of the process.
I mean, I would be really disappointed if I was unable, after like as much hype as I'm having for this book, if I was unable to play my very similar but legally distinct from Obadiah Eruxi Gunslinger.
So, obviously you have to use some achievement points to buy an Eruxi, right? But without saying anything else, what I said, I think people will be excited. Some people will be excited for the ideas that they have. I don't think people would be excited by an idea that you can't play.
Yeah. Like, look at this cool new class that you just bought. No.
I like to think that, like a sheriff, you need 1 star to play a gunslinger.
Ooh.
I think it's fair to say that it being banned is not something that you are likely to see.
What an
I wouldn't have
announcement that would
characterized
be.
it that way.
Can't. Nope.
No, if there
Yeah.
are problems that are with it that are identified, we will fix those problems. It will not happen. But beyond that, they're still figuring things out. Everything I've heard sounds great, and I think people will like it, but don't want to lock them in.
I think we're ready to start talking about the first of the two classes we're going to be covering today, and that is the Gunslinger. And Mike, I understand you're the one that took the lead on the Gunslinger. Is that appropriate to say?
That would be correct. Yeah, I wrote the first draft of the Gunslinger, and I've been, responding as necessary and managing the threads for it as the playtest goes on. So, yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to set the tone and say this is one of the classes I am least likely to allow in my game, and I'm glad it is uncommon. So now you get to try and convince me I'm wrong.
I am
You're not necessarily wrong. You
so
make
many
your own
guns.
decision.
All right. Well, then don't convince me I'm wrong, but just see if you can change my mind that there's something I'm not seeing in here. So what is the direction you went with the Gunslinger?
So the Gunslinger had a lot of kind of history and baggage attached to it, right? Both really, 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 really good, and some that was kind of in the opposite direction, depending on who you asked, right? So one of the things that we wanted to do with this Gunslinger is we knew it was going to be controversial no matter what we did. The moment we said Gunslinger, it was going to be a thing. And so we wanted to come at it. And so first of all, say this is a fantasy class, right? This class belongs in the world of Golarion. It belongs in the game of Pathfinder. You've seen it in our art. You've seen it in everything else. And so we want it to kind of act like those, but we also want it to appeal to the people who want a gunslinger, right? Like there's things you look for. There is things that you know from podcasts and shows and movies. And there's just so much kind of metadata floating around out there that people, consciously or subconsciously kind of latch onto when they hear gunslinger. And so I wanted to just kind of scoop up as much of that as I could for the playtest, right? If your idea of a gunslinger is almost entirely anime informed, I wanted to give you a version of this where you could like lean into that, but still feel like a fantasy character in Golarion. If you have a much kind of grittier, more realistic view of what a gunslinger is, I had a background in the military and stuff, and you probably see a little bit of that in the way I talk about certain things in the class. I just wanted to talk to as many people who had their own kind of headcanon of what this class was as possible, while keeping it inside the realm of the game world. And I wanted guns to be cool, right? I didn't want guns to just be a weapon that you use because it's solely a big bucket of damage or solely because it's easier to hit people with it. I wanted them to be something where the fact that it was a part of your character was a constant presence, but it didn't mean that other people couldn't have guns be part of their characters as well.
So tell me about crossbows.
Crossbows. So again, the original Gunslinger was somewhat divisive, right? There were people who really, really loved it. There were people who didn't like it as much, didn't ever want it in their games. When the Advanced Class Guide came out back in first edition, there was the Bolt Slinger or Bolt Ace. Bolt Ace
yeah.
archetype. And suddenly something that you saw across all kinds of forums and all kinds of tables were people being like, well, okay, you can play a gunslinger, but you have to take the Bolt Ace archetype. That's the only way I'm going to let you come to my table with a gunslinger, right? And knowing how kind of popular and common that was, and that there were a lot of people who might want a class that has these kind of flashy shootist abilities, or who wants to play a sniper but doesn't want guns in their game, we're like, let's just bake it in. We'll just make the Bolt Ace be the gunslinger just as much as the base gunslinger in PF1 was, right? We'll just package it all together and make this the class that revolves around those shooting themes and can quickly adapt them to the crossbows if that's what you want in your game, and that's kind of where you want to draw the technological limit line.
Reading through this class, I really appreciated that as a fan of the crossbow as a weapon, but historically throughout Pathfinder, it's always sort of held second fiddle to just bow and arrow because of all the support it had. But reading through the Gunslinger, even just if I just wanted to be master of crossbows, this class really seems to hit all the like big moments I want with that sort of weaponry.
Oh, good.
And I will actually join in on the appreciation that the crossbow is included, because it was one of the first things that made me reconsider the gunslinger class. And at first, when I was noticing crossbow showing up a lot, I was like, is this just an avenue you could take? But no, you really did just say anything you can do with a gun, you can do with a crossbow as well. And that's appreciated.
I think there's a handful of things where that doesn't apply, because we just couldn't make it make sense, right? Like,
you
there's
can't
like
overheat the barrel of your crossbow to cauterize a wound.
The cauterize is exactly the one I was going for. No matter how many times you fire that, you're not going to get enough heat to then turn around and
put the bolt in there and like
you have to do a peasant railgun, and it starts getting so powerful that it eventually creates enough heat.
Right.
So I feel bad. I'm kind of letting a lot of things go in chat because we are going at a pretty fast pace here, and chat has also thrown questions out pretty quickly. But one I want to get to right now, Numbat18 wants to know, did you consider changing the name given that crossbow is as big a part of the class as the gun?
So I didn't want a gunslinger class a year ago. In fact, the meeting where we were talking about what's our 2021 book going to be, I raised my hand the moment Mona walked into the room, and he says, I see Mike has thoughts. And I was like, do we have to have a gunslinger class? Was literally the first words said during that meeting. And the reality is, by the end of that meeting, I was very convinced that the answer was yes. We did need a gunslinger class. There was so much cachet to the name. It's something where, like, if we had brought this out and we're like, the Drifter and the Inventor, we probably wouldn't have anywhere near the amount of energy that we've seen from people. And I say energy as a neutral term, right?
Oh, yes.
And we also might have just missed the people who have been waiting for it, right? Because like I said, literally since the moment we announced second edition, people have been asking, when are we going to get guns? When are we going to get the Gunslinger? And any name that wasn't Gunslinger was going to be missing that audience. It was going to be running the risk that we just didn't talk to them, even though we were giving them what they wanted. So,
It has quite a few changes from first edition's version of the Gunslinger. So with a different name, it might have been accused of not being a gunslinger.
Like Ship of Theseus situation, where it's like, well, if it has different mechanics that have been re-envisioned to work in second edition, and it has a different name as well, and a different iconic, is there anything that's the same?
Yeah.
Let's talk about the iconic then. So for some reason, Lorraine has been replaced with a unnamed, at this point, dwarven gunslinger. What was wrong with Lorraine?
I have a finite number of answers to that, because I do not actually know the name or backstory of the new Gunslinger iconic yet. That is going to be written by somebody who we identify as being best able to tell that story. But there were a lot of factors there, right? And I will tell you, one of the most amusing ones is that Lyrianne is a pain in the butt for miniature manufacturers to sculpt and print. Her hat is a huge problem. This has been brought to us by our partners on multiple occasions.
I love the hat.
I would have never guessed that.
It played into it. The other thing is that in the Inner Sea, which is kind of the center of our setting, right? It's where we focus most of our stories, our adventure paths, and stuff like that. And we're certainly branching out, but it is still kind of the center of things. It's where we have the most information. It's where we have the most background. It's where we give people the most tools to come play. In the Inner Sea, guns are from Alkenstar, and Alkenstar gets its guns from Dongan Hold, which is a dwarven stronghold in Garand, which is essentially, a continent that is closer to, or at least our portion of it, is you have Osirian, you have Katapesh, you have the Mwangi Expanse, Thuvia, and Rahadum. You go all the way around, and eventually you get to the Shackles where you have pirates and stuff, but it's a setting that Lyrianne didn't really represent, which was kind of weird, given that it's the part of our game where that class comes from and all those mechanics come from.
Yep.
And also, just personally, I really wanted Wayne to draw a big frickin' chonky dwarven gun, man.
I mean, what
we
gun
knew that
is that? It's
we knew
awesome
that
looking,
almost
but gosh.
immediately when we realized that we were looking at a new iconic for this class, that whoever the iconic was, they weren't going to be another pistol twirler. They were going to be somebody with a Wayne Reynolds cannon. And I think that's probably going to be something like a dwarven scattergun. In the playtest, I think it's closest to a blunderbuss, but it's so awesome. I don't know that I'm going to do it the disservice of just saying that's what a dwarven blunderbuss looks like. It might get to be one of the dwarven guns that we're going to be bringing in when we do the full gun list for the final book.
I'm liking some of the comments
suggests
in chat.
It's a 75 gauge.
I also like Musard's name. It's the Chunk Cannon.
There you go. But yeah, absolutely. Like Lyrian as a half elf and half Kalashite, and you're from an area where there are a fair number of Kalashites in Alkenstar, but most of the people there are Garundi and all the dwarves. We have a bunch of the kind of half elf characters that are from Garund area. Jarrell also was in that sort of category, and so there was discussion between some of them and which ones might be able to be sort of different representation as sort of a part of it.
So I also want to quote Dr. Nielsen 24/7 in chat saying that gauge actually goes down to be more impressive, so that's a 2 gauge.
Thank you.
I have no idea. I know very little about guns. I appreciate that correction.
Well, he is like guards guns for a living, so I think that he knows for sure.
Okay, so you actually know who this person is.
Ms. Roy says the actual dwarven sidearm is a freaking howitzer.
So going over the basics of the class, it is keyed to Dex, which I don't think anyone is surprised by. 8 HP. We'll talk about that in a second. Expert in Fort and Reflex, trained in Will. Trained in crafting as far as skills go, trained in something related to the way, and then 3+ intelligence.
I also
it is an expert in simple firearms, martial firearms, simple and martial crossbows, trained in advanced firearms and crossbows, trained in simple martial and unarmed other weapons. Yeah. And also defense is trained in light and unarmed armor.
I also want to point out that I know we don't usually go over what they turn into, but I think it's important to point out that this is one of the classes that eventually becomes legendary perception.
Oh, yeah, I skipped perception completely. So the big thing on the list there is that it is expert at first level, which is something that's been reserved for the fighter up until now. Even the monk is not expert at unarmed strike. So it's weird to say, why is the gunslinger an expert at firearms right from the start? But I guess the real question is, why is the gunslinger an expert at firearms, but the monk is not an expert at unarmed strike?
I'll let Mark tackle that, but I will tell you kind of my perspective on it, right, is that the monk's ability to be better at unarmed strikes is better than the fighter's, and it is not because of its proficiency. It's because of its access to stances and abilities that blow its ability to fight unarmed out a lot, right? With the gunslinger, there was you yourself stumbled over it, right? You were like, why is the gunslinger expert at fire? You know what? Let's move on with this question. And we knew that was going to be true for a lot of people. And without a very specific design model, right, it's harder to answer that question with the monk. With the monk, it's real easy. Why is the monk not legendary? Well, because the fighter is really good at fighting like a sports fighter, but the monk has an entire level of skill and in many cases spiritualism that come into play that make it better at the thing it's doing in ways that are beyond just a pure kind of accuracy with punching level.
Yes. And Mike, you pretty much covered it, but mostly the being legendary with weapons is a fighter specific thing, and that doesn't mean other classes can't also have that, but it means that if they do, that having that is a big portion of what they have.
Yeah.
So like if the barbarian was legendary with weapons, then it would not have rage, perhaps, for example. The monk was legendary with weapons. It wouldn't be legendary at unarmored defense and having all of those other expert in all saves to begin with, flurry of blows, all of those other things that it has. the champion was legendary in weapons, it wouldn't be legendary in heavy armor. If the ranger was, it wouldn't be able to reduce multiple attack penalties by a massive amount or add a big amount of precision damage, or the rogue wouldn't have sneak attack, or the swashbuckler wouldn't have giant finishing strikes. So basically, having that legendary is a toggle, and you can have it. But if you do, there's a lot of stuff you won't have. And in the surveys for the classes, we ask a question that basically says, hey, this is what we've done. We gave it legendary. What do you think, though? Do you want it to have more like other abilities and not have legendary? Or do you like how it's going now, or other options? And we kind of leave that to the people taking the survey to decide what they think.
So
is
I
the fighter an expert in firearms at first level now?
Yes. Simple and martial. Yeah. If that's their weapon, if that's their weapon group.
Yeah. Which is relevant to this conversation, right? Is that firearms do not exist in like their own category. They're not exotic weapons. They're not, well, there may be advanced there may be some advanced firearms, but it's not that all firearms are advanced. There are simple firearms, there are martial firearms, and by the time we're done, there will probably be advanced firearms as well. And that's a very intentional thing, right? That in some ways is a callback to a moment that I still laugh about sometimes in that same meeting I mentioned where we decided we were going to do this book, where we were talking about, well, should firearms be exotic weapons? And we're like, well, you know, some firearms should maybe be a little bit more complex to use, but then at the same time, if there is a weapon that drops in the game and the point of this weapon is that you should be able to pull a trigger, and if it's been properly loaded, it fires. Is it weird that that weapon is harder to use than a star knife, which is a weird circle with 4 blades popping off of it, right?
That question is also in the survey, because that's we went with just what Mike said there, which is, hey, it's guns. That's cool. Let's balance them with other weapons in their category rather than try to be like it's guns, so they're better and they're harder to use, which is a little weird. But we also left that up to people taking the survey to decide whether they like that approach, whether they prefer a different approach. So take the survey and you can give your answer on that.
Maybe I will take the survey then.
Yeah, maybe even though you don't like the Gunslinger, you should.
And those of you listening
anyway.
at home,
I didn't say I didn't like the Gunslinger. I said the
surveys.
Gunslinger's not for me. That really starts at the theme.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But make sure you say you still want to answer about the guns if you have opinions on what we just said.
Yeah, and I won't level any judgments at all at a guy who has G.I. Joes all over the side of his room, but for some reason doesn't like the Gunslinger. Not even one.
I'm feeling pretty called out right now.
Well, let's actually talk about the mechanics of the Gunslinger, like what it does. We've got 3 ways, and I do love that term. We've got the way of the drifter, the way of the pistolero, and the way of the sniper, and this is similar to other classes' turning points. How'd you pick these 3 to go with?
So one thing I knew right from the very, very beginning of starting work on this class was that I wanted a sniper option in there. There are things that work in Pathfinder 2nd edition in a very particular way that make a sniper concept much more achievable than I think it's been in just about any other edition of any tabletop RPG I've played that uses this kind of crunchy D20 style of framework, right? The ability to load up an initial shot without then breaking what happens in subsequent rounds of the encounter, the ability to lean into the 4 degrees of success and use that as another angle that we can intersect with. This was the time where I was like, this is the chance. This is where we can build a sniper and have it be something that's really cool and doesn't shatter the game, because we can make that first shot count. We can make it a big deal, and then in later levels, we can build out into that concept and turn it into something that can really function within this framework. So I had to have it. It's something that I always wanted throughout like all of 1st edition. I was like, man, I really want to just play a sniper. I don't even care about putting 20 attacks down lane. I just want a character that can make that shot where everybody goes, oh, when they see the dice hit the table, you know? Pistolero, we knew that we weren't going to completely get rid of Lyrianne, right? She wasn't going to leave the game entirely. She was going to be around, and she is super cool, you know, with her tricorn hat and her dual pistols and everything. And Pistolero was also just a super popular archetype. You saw it a lot in, you know, build guides and just people talking about their characters. So that was in there. And so we had something, I don't think sniper is a new concept. I just think it was a mechanical framework that we could fit in there. And then we had this thing that was really the core. And I was like, so the last thing I want is something new. I want to play around. We're going to have a play test. This is the chance to see if we can do something and if it's going to speak to certain audiences. So let's do a class that's based off of, like, you know, Jubei from Seven Samurai, or something that's can do like a katana and pistol, or it can do you know, the recent remake of the Magnificent Seven, have a character that does like a tomahawk and still grabs a gun, or does these other things and plays in a way that is a really cool concept that you see in a lot of the media that surrounds the idea of a gunslinger, a lot of action movies, a lot of westerns and stuff like that, but never really gets a lot of that main attention. And that's where the Drifter came from.
Okay, cool. When I saw the Drifter, I was like, oh, this is where I throw on my heavy armor and get my Fallout power armor, like Stompy Town going. And that was where I was seeing it.
I would definitely. So somebody brought up, they're like, oh, I'm going to use the Drifter to make the Mandalorian. And I was like, I love the Mandalorian. I had never drawn that connection, but the moment somebody said it, I was like, yeah, that's the way to do that.
It is the way to do that.
It is the way. Yes.
Sorry, I am trying to go through all the chat questions and put them
We
in
have a
some kind
very
of order
active chat tonight.
between the things we should talk about before we move away from Gunslinger. So, Param, could you keep going on with the mechanics of the Gunslinger?
All right. So beyond that, each of the ways has a I forget what you call it, but they have a basic ability they start with, and then they get more advanced. They have what?
Deeds.
They have deeds like in Pathfinder First Edition.
Yeah. And notably absent is the grit mechanic. We don't have, like, it gets named a little bit, but this whole point-based showing off flair thing that the Gunslinger started off with doesn't exist here. And this was a little bit surprising after the Swashbuckler showed the state of panache could be so wonderful. But I think that this really works a lot. You do have a lot of tricks that you're going to get as you level up through the Gunslinger feats. The deeds, let's start off with Way of the Drifter. Its initial deed is Into the Fray. And I notice that all the initial deeds start with you roll initiative somehow. And you basically, you can draw both your melee weapon and your attack weapon, and then you get to stride as a free action on you as the first action of your turn. What's the theory behind the initial deeds and them all using initiative first off?
So there's kind of this underlying idea that the Drifter is like the melee way, and then the Pistolero is like the mid-range where you might kind of move into melee or move back to clear space to shoot, right? And then the Sniper is very much the long range way, where your preferred way to engage in combat is from way out there, and so that the first person you hit doesn't even know you're there until they explode in a fine mist of gore and everyone does the ooh thing that I was mentioning earlier, right? And so the other thing is that we knew guns needed to reload, right? That was just a thing that was going to happen. If there weren't reload mechanics, it was going to get weird for people, or it was going to require us to front load guns that are going to be even more fantasy breaking for people, right? Like flintlocks and those kind of, you know, more Renaissance era firearms, those fit into fantasy a lot better than a Gatling gun, right? But that being the case, the part of the story of those guns is that you have to go through the act of reloading them, right? And then that became something we could play with. But it also meant there was a lot of action economy requirements happening with the Gunslinger, right? And they were layered on top of each other. And so the initial deeds going off of initiative is essentially to allow each of those ways to set the field for themselves, to put themselves in what is essentially the prime position for them to then use their combat style from and fight from. So with the Drifter, it's boom, got my sword, boom, got my hand cannon, and as soon as my turn comes up, I'm into the fray. I'm lit off, and then I'll end up paying that action over time as I reload and stuff. Because even though they've got the same proficiency as the fighter, right? The fighter can pick a lot of weapons. He doesn't need to reload. That's part of the action economy balance that comes into play. So really, that is why those key off of rolling initiative as their thing, is to make sure that when you go in, you're starting the field in a way that is really good for you. And then that's going to help position you to play out through the rest of the fight from a position that kind of complements what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. And then with the Pistolero, they do the opposite. They get a 10-foot step, and I noticed that it's not straight backwards. They can just step in any direction 10 feet.
Correct.
And also a 10-foot step. This is the first time we're seeing a 10-foot step in the game.
I think elves and a few other people get it.
Okay.
Maybe Tiger's stance for the monk.
Mm-hmm.
It does come up a couple places. I think this is the second time it's become available as a class option, and it doesn't require you to step into a stance first like Tiger stance does. So, but it's also something you can only do when the combat sets off, right? So,
and then the sniper, it's one shot, one kill, and like all the other ones, it's involved with initiatives. You get your gun out immediately. They all get their gun out immediately, mm-hmm. but it boosts the damage of that first shot that you make in the combat.
Yeah, it's a bit slower than sneak attack, and it only applies to that first attack, and then other attacks later will be enabled by, future deeds that you get for the way. But it is about the sniper is about making the first impression, right? That's what they want to do. They want to announce themselves with a big shot that goes off right out the gate, and because of the fact that they like to sneak, they get stealth as part of their package. They've got that legendary proficiency. It means there's a very, very good chance that when that shot goes off, it's going to be a crit, and you're going to see that bonus damage be emphasized, and those other abilities that are tied to that be emphasized in a really kind of cool, explosive way.
And then as they level... I'm sorry.
How does the precision damage from the sniper weapon trait interact with the precision damage from the other sniper abilities?
It all combines.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's additional damage.
Yep.
Good.
Yeah. So and again, because this is Pathfinder 2nd edition, that all multiplies on the crit as well. So it makes that punch when it go off. Yeah, you're just putting it together now, aren't you?
I'm just now remembering those playtest games with Micheal where she would just obliterate CR+3 monsters on the crit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a reason there are some limitations around when and how you can do this.
But one of the things that surprised me is like all the three of the ways really set up like what your build is like, at least with your preferred weapon and your preferred playstyle. But then we go into the feats that you get as a gunslinger, and I expected these to be kind of like we see in a lot of the other classes where there's this one's the obvious one for this one, this one's the but that's not what plays out here. It seems that most of these are quote all of these ? Are just open to any of the ways, and if you can come up with a reason why that'd be useful, you can take them. There doesn't seem to be, this is the obvious, you must take it sniper feat at this level, so ignore all the other ones at this level.
There's one cycle at level 6?
Level 6 has feats that are locked to ways, but when you have a spellcaster and you want to put some limitations on something, that flavor and those limitations can really kind of write themselves, right? Like, I want this to be an abjurer. Why do I want it to be only for abjurers? Because that's a particular type of magic. With martial abilities, you got to have a much better reason to kind of gate something off, right? And you look at the fighter doesn't even have path options, right? It's just, here, build the fighter that fights the way you want to fight, right? And so the Gunslinger does a lot of that. There's actually a build I've got right now where people are like, why would anybody take quick draw? And I was like, well, one of those reasons is you might just not want to waste actions reloading, especially at lower levels, right? I've got a playtest character I'm going to be playing later tonight who's my my pirate from Goka, Rakoga Gin, who has a bandolier of hand cannons and fights with nunchaku, and he's a drifter, right?
Yes, pistol braces for the win.
Yeah, and so he'll go in and he'll just, you know, he'll start with drawing one, he'll fight with his nunchucks and that. As soon as it's done, he just quick draws out the next, and he doesn't even really start using like reloading strike and stuff until he's down to his last hand cannon.
When he has to go around and start picking his guns back up.
Oh, that's why you attach them to a string. When you have a brace of pistols, you put a string on the handle.
Oh, someone's evoking some of the worst memories of first edition for certain people right now.
Oh, no. I just liked it because it was historically accurate. I was like, yes, that's exactly what happened.
Well, yeah, I mean, and Blackbeard was definitely a historical figure that I thought about a lot while working on this. You know, like I said, one of the things we really wanted people to know, something that was important for, I think, literally everybody at Paizo who has intersected with this book up to this point, was that people know this is not a book to play a different type of game. These are characters that belong in this world and that are from this world and that operate alongside all of the other classes we've introduced in this world. Maybe a little less frequently and maybe under slightly more specific circumstances, but they're still part of that world.
Okay, so should we move on to? I don't want to move on, but should we move on?
Before we move on to
You've got about 40
Inventor,
minutes.
I've got the stockpile of listener questions. Is there any last thing we want to talk about firearms before we move away from the Gunslinger?
They don't target touch AC because it doesn't exist. I think that's worth saying.
Okay. That's it. We'll move on to the questions then.
It's great.
So these are kind of all over the place. So some of them might take recontextualizing, but we'll see. We'll see how quickly we can get through them. Edward, if the way of the sniper is the way of the two-handed gun and the way of the drifter and pistolero are both for dual wielding, will there be a way of free-handing?
So like a one-in. So Pistolero was originally kind of the one gun and then a second if you wanted it. It evolved a little bit as it went through development passes to give it a little bit more choice in how people want to interact with it. But I would actually kind of look at it more as the drifter is the dual wielder. The pistolero is, you probably only want one pistol until you get to higher levels, and then you're probably going to start moving more into that 2-pistol build, or you might not, right? Because having a free hand when you've got reload weapons, that's never going to be a bad thing for you. I think we'll still see some more evolutions based on feedback. You know, this is just a play test. We're going into, once this is all done, we're going to come back and Mark and I are going to dig through all that data and we're going to find out what maybe was something that drifted away from its original goal that needs to be brought on course, what's something that needs to be pushed farther to do what it's doing, and things like that. So,
plus we've seen with the action economy for PF2, it really does make a freehand build's a lot more viable than it was in PF1.
That's for sure.
All right. Ezekiru wants to know, I'll just read it the way they wrote it just in case. I'm not entirely sure what direction he's going with this. What about the problems currently present for dual wielding weapons, especially two guns? So I don't know if he means problems as in penalties or as in it's
it's when your hands are filled with guns, then what are you going to do to reload them? We know about those, and we have multiple different ideas for several different ways to tackle that moving forward, including we mentioned on the boards, I think I think Mike, you may have mentioned both of the ways at least once, just something like the feat that the 2-weapon warrior has to reload both of them while you're holding both of them, and then potentially something involving a brace of a bunch of different weapons that are all sharing a rune somehow in a way that you can't exploit with quick draw to get around reloading.
When I outlined this, I had an entire page of bandoliers and accessories that were like magical, and they were like, do you think we're going to need all of these? And I was like, we're going to want all of these. Need is a word I don't really care about. Want is what I'm looking at. And that's kind of the answer, right? We're going to look at things like the dual weapon reload from the dual weapon warrior. We might end up just bringing that right into the class. We might end up giving it something that's kind of like that, but a little different. We're going to have a variety of cool items at all kinds of levels that will allow you to do fun, different things. Like I just said, my solution for my playtest character with the reloading was to say, like, I'm not going to do it until I have a hand free to do it, right? But then the level you're talking about affects what kind of options are going to be in play, and of course the feedback data and what people thought was most intuitive, what people thought was least intuitive. That'll also influence final decisions on how we do it. But the answer is there's probably going to be like 6 or 7 different ways that you can handle this. Some of them in the class, some of them in the ways, some of them in items.
Are we gonna? I really like the first edition, the one spell that was illustrated where you just had ghost hands reloading your guns for you.
There was like a ring, right? Wasn't there? I feel like Ultimate Combat had like a ring where the ring reloaded your gun for you.
Wasn't there like a spider that you
like
to the gun and it crawled into it and it would reload it for you and like clean it up a little bit and then crawl out and you would have a lower misfire chance.
I thought that was the ring. I think the ring like had a spider that would climb out of it and go reload the gun.
It was like a slate spider.
Yes.
Anyways, the point is there are a whole lot of answers to that question.
Including answers with spiders.
Yep.
Which are the best answers.
Wolfster Art, is there more to the gunslinger than just trying to crit with weapons? I think they're talking tactically.
I mean, I think so. I think it has either the most reaction options of any class in the game or close to it. And answering the question we just answered is going to also end up having an influence on how many of those reactions you really use as you go through a round. There's positioning. The sniper also is one that really kind of encourages looking at alchemical options for AoE and weakness targeting. I think the class in general it's probably not quite as good at targeting weaknesses as an alchemist or inventor, but I think it's the next in that tier. You know, if alchemist and inventor are kind of some of the best classes for targeting weaknesses, I would put probably like monk and gunslinger in the tier right below that. So
I mean, it's also got a ton of like weapon-based tricks that not a lot of other classes have. I mean, you can intimidate by firing a shot in the air. You've got covering fire. You can literally shoot a weapon away that was about to hit an ally. I mean, it might not be the most powerful set of abilities, but it's definitely going to be some of the most fun toolkit you'll have at the table.
It'll interact with the team in ways that I think a lot of people don't expect based on the first edition Gunslinger. I was watching a reaction video the other day for work, and and there was this moment where the person had like read through the class and then got through, and they were like, "Oh, this is a martial buffer debuffer. If that's what you want to do, this class can actually like really be very tricky in the way that it plays." And that's very intentional because, of course, we want it to be more than just a crit fishing machine, even if it really does like to fish for crits.
And it has both. Right?
Yep.
Like it doesn't give up on having that ridiculous accuracy and grip fishing in order to get those abilities. Like you get whatever you want, which is both.
Yeah, one of my favorite abilities that it has is Curtain of Smoke, where you prime a shot with extra black powder just to flood cover in the area, which is a really neat trick for a martial character to do.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, Dom Hero Ellis 13 wants to know how does Firearm crit interact with Grievous Wound?
It probably would do the same thing as the other weapon groups that have the same kind of stunned effect with the Grievous rune.
All right, T for Goblins.
But like that's not an official answer, but because the Grievous rune doesn't say anything about the gun group, but that's what you should probably do.
T for Goblins wants to know, are we going to see speed loaders or revolvers?
There will be a lot of guns in this game. There is a particular technology bandwidth that we are looking for this. That technology bandwidth does not extend to, for example, Numeria in our setting. That is a different book than this book. And I think that that's about as much as I can answer that question.
Yeah, pretty much, right? Because eventually you get to a certain point where something that's newer is just better and more powerful. And we're not going to put a set of guns in the book that we balance with all the other weapons, assuming that that's what people say in the server that they want and are like, these are the ones that you should use, and then put a bunch of other ones in there. Like, but these are just better than everything else, and they're not the ones you should use, but they're in here.
River Ray asks, will we see a spell slinger option of some sort?
I will tell you that in the outline, the words gun and mage in at least one, maybe a couple different points do appear directly adjacent to each other. And yeah.
Yes. My Signar miniatures will have use again.
Just because Alkenstar doesn't have any magic doesn't mean that everywhere that has guns in the setting doesn't have any magic.
Speaking of which, I mentioned earlier, we've got that uncommon class sidebar in there, right? I'm not going to like repeat that whole thing because that would just be silly.
Oh yeah, they mentioned it in chat.
That sidebar brings up a lot of the places where people in the world of Galarian would have access to firearms. And you'll notice there are some places mentioned in that sidebar that we haven't talked a lot about prior to this book. We're going to talk a little bit more about them.
Yeah, fans of our podcast, right. Valiant will be very pleased.
Yeah. I wasn't going to mention it because I forgot it was in the sidebar, but yes, it's in the sidebar.
Last question about the Gunslinger. As a Kiru, what about a way for blunderbuss or shotgun, since none of the ways really cover that kind of firearm?
So that is actually something that I have been putting some thought into. I don't have an answer for it right now. I will tell you, I actually, when I was playing around with how would I build the Iconic, she was a sniper with a blunderbuss, which is kind of a lot cooler than you might think. But I have seen people mentioning that like they don't necessarily associate those two things. And I grew up around guns. Like my grandpa is... I've had random people in Alaska walk up to me to tell me like how my grandpa is incredibly accurate with a shotgun, which is a thing that I think you can only really understand if you were born and raised in Alaska. But I think I've kind of realized that that is a much bigger stretch for most people to connect a scatter weapon with that path, and maybe they need a little something extra that emphasizes that. I don't know yet, but I'm thinking about it. That's the answer.
I kind of want the first level deed for the shotgun one to just be called Close Enough.
Any final thoughts on the Gunslinger? Let's go with Mike.
Yeah. I mean, I just hope people like it, you know, and we knew going in there was going to be stuff that some people wouldn't like and some people would really like, and that there would probably not be very many pieces of this class that didn't evoke strong feelings on one end of the spectrum or the other from some people. That's why we've got a survey. You know, go take the survey, tell us what your thoughts are, tell us what you like, what you didn't like. There's going to be a Gunslinger class. That's the only thing I can tell you with 100% certainty at this point in time, right? So,
hey, wait. There's going to be an Inventor class.
Yes, yeah. But as far as like the particulars of those go, right? This playtest is the time to come in and let us know what you want, what you need, and what you hope to see.
And you have been posting some updates and clarifications in the Welcome to the Gunslinger class playtest, which I think people should check out. It's mostly just wording clarifications. I don't think you've actually changed anything about the class in any of these 5 points you brought up, but I'm going to share it in chat in case anyone has missed it.
Yep.
Now we're talking about the Inventor. Now I get excited.
Yes, I'm still excited.
All right, well, you stay excited. I get excited.
There you go.
The Inventor is amazing. I am so happy with this. I was giddy reading it. So besides making me giddy, what was the intent of this class and the direction you were going with it?
Well, when we were talking about the class, we were like, what would make Ryan giddy when he was reading it? But no, not really. We basically wanted something that was brand new and that played upon the other half of Guns and Gears, right? Because Guns and Gears is not a book that is Guns and Gears and it all is like completely inseparable. It is guns and gears. And so there's some places in the setting you can see in the sidebar that have inventors, but maybe not gunslingers or vice versa. And so the inventor is the class that represents the gears half of that equation. And so it is a little bit mad scientist, maybe a lot mad scientist. It's got all sorts of weird kind of innovations, and it's tied just to a lot of very sort of cinematic things that I've seen in movies and TV shows and other places that people are doing with weapons. In some cases, like I didn't necessarily recognize where I was getting it from. Like when I described how the explosive leap worked and Logan was like, does that just you shoot a gun? I was like, no, with a hammer, maybe like you jet off with a hammer. He's like, how does that work? And then James Case posted a meme like to Nora from Ruby. And I was like, oh yeah, that's what I meant when I said the hammer. I've seen that show, and that's probably part of what I was thinking of, but I I didn't realize exactly where everything was coming from. I just knew I was like, that's something that makes sense, that you can explosely launch yourself with a giant hammer.
Both classes have a way to rocket jump.
It's important. You've got to have a way to rocket jump. I mean, fighters and barbarians also have a sudden leap, but they don't do it with rocket jump. So is it really as good?
It's nowhere near as good. No.
And Inventors is at first level because it's unstable and it might blow up your thing.
I like that in the class features there are multiple ways you could blow up, including on purpose.
Yeah.
Unstable is brilliant. I love it.
And we're going to fix the actual part of unstable where you try again. That's one of the things in my clarification thread. Because something weird happened and we wound up putting up the version that we have now where when you try again, you have an 80% chance that you waste the actions in combat. It was always intended to be like, you get to do the unstable thing again, but then maybe something really horrible happens to you. But we'll get that fixed for the final version, guaranteed. And even in the survey, we released it before knowing that change had been made, and the survey even refers to an earlier version of unstable. So literally, I couldn't go back in and put an option that said, "Hey, I like the version that's in the playtest if I wanted to," but we're pretty aware that nobody really likes the version that's in the playtest where you usually lose your actions, and there's not a line of thought that it's going to stay that way. So we'll find something better for it to do.
So is the bigger issue the DC 17 flat check or the consequences of failure?
Oh, no, it's the consequences of failure. Okay. I am perfectly happy for you to have an 80% chance that something bad happens if you decide to overclock and try it again when you know you shouldn't. That's fine. But the bad thing should be in addition to successfully completing your action so that you get... That's more of a mad scientist thing. It's not like, oh, I might waste my turn because my thing blows up. It's more of a, oh yeah, I did it again, like I probably shouldn't have, and now this. And
well, this is tapping into the same sort of fun that is overcharging a wand. I mean, you get the spell, but then boom.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, initially it worked almost exactly like that, and I think what happened was it changed out of that because that was a little harsh. That you lost it for the rest of the day. When it blew up, but then we didn't like go back and reconsolidate over figuring out what it was doing, and I hadn't been aware of that. So we're gonna get unstable working and doing something really fun, and even without that extra usage, which is always a last ditch resort anyway, you can do some really amazing things with unstable.
All right, well, let's talk about the basics before we get more into the weeds. It's an intelligence-based class that makes a lot of sense. For the theme, it is kind of surprising to have an intelligence-based. It's a very combat class, which I was not entirely expecting. We'll get into that. But it is intelligence-based, which is probably the only one that I can think of. I couldn't think of a second ability that it could be the or option. 8 hit points again, expert in forts, trained in reflex, expert in will. Trained in crafting and 3+ intelligence others, and it's intelligence based, so that's going to be a lot. Attacks trained in simple, martial, and unarmed. Defenses trained in light, medium, and unarmored. I don't think there's anything controversial or really to even go into there, right?
No, I mean, I wonder, like, I guess I'm just conflating will with wisdom, and I'm thinking that there's no way on earth it should have high in that, but I think I just need to remember that those are two different things, even if they're often considered similar.
They're a little bit different, and they don't get their will to go up quite as quickly as, or do they get it a little bit faster than fortitude? I'm blanking on that right now. And perception is the one that they're a little bit focused on their own devices and machines, and not so focused on everything else in the world around them, and so that doesn't go up as quickly. But if you want to be able to build a low wisdom character, it actually helps to have a little bit of will built into the class to sort of help backstop you on that. Because if you have a really poor will progression and you put poor wisdom on the character, that can be a pretty significant weakness.
Well, especially when it's like you're mind controlled and just keep taking unstable actions.
Yeah, right. Yeah, just do it. There's no problem with unstable action. I'm sure it's going to be totally fine.
That's a feature, not a problem.
No, literally, when I was reading the unstable rules, I just scrolled back up to double check what my rank in saving throws was. And I say mine because in a week we will be running a playtest with 6 members of the No Direction Network. We will all be playing some version of Gunslinger or Inventor, and I will be playing an Armor Inventor, and I am so excited about that.
I am playing
most of the class options had already been taken before I got to choose mine, and so Armor Inventor was a little bit left over, and I think it ended up being my favorite one anyway.
Really?
Awesome.
But yeah, that's the 3 different types of Inventor.
Yeah, the innovations. You've got the Armor Innovator, the Armor Innovation, the Construct Innovation, and the Weapon Innovation. The Armor Innovation, very Iron Man. And it gives us some stats that right off the bat, you're going to get this fancy piece of medium armor. So looking at just the numbers of the armor you get, what is so great about it?
What is so great about the Armor Inventor?
Well, start with the stats, the armor itself.
Okay, so it's pretty similar to breastplate as an armor overall, but it also is going to come in with some resistances that can help you out.
All right, we have to talk about these resistances because I am playing a Shark Folk, which is a third-party publisher product, and one of the heritages gives me cold resistance, and so I didn't take thermal insulation because that would be redundant with the cold resistance. And I just felt dumb for not taking thermal insulation, which really feels like fire and cold being the best combination of all the resistances you could choose from.
I mean, fire and cold is solid, especially if you might blow up on yourself and deal fire damage. And it's especially good for someone with I guess your armor, so you don't have a construct that's going to blow up. So I don't have to worry about that.
Well, you can, because you get to have an extra
companion. You can, but then it won't explode.
Oh, yeah.
Your armor
will. The
explode.
prototype doesn't explode?
The companion doesn't explode if it's not your innovation. Because what explodes is your innovation.
Companion. Yeah.
If you were armor and also had a construct companion, which you're allowed to do, then the armor would be what explodes and you would be safe. Whereas someone with a construct companion is not safe from the explosion that the construct companion does. It's the only one of the 3 that's not safe from the explosion.
So the resistance we're talking about, you get 2 plus half your level to a number of damage types when you wear your armor. And so, like we were saying, one of the combinations is fire and cold. One of them is force and sonic. One of them is acid and electricity, which is the one I ended up going with. And one other one is otherworldly protection, which is either positive energy, negative energy, and alignment-based damage of a single type. Which I considered taking, but it just felt like acid and electricity is going to come up.
It's all alignment damage, but
I thought you chose.
Depending on your character, you may not be able to be damaged by alignment damage anyway.
Right. Yeah. Sorry.
So
right.
if you're a lawful good human, for example, you get you get 3 out of that. You're resistant to negative, evil, and chaotic, which when you're going up against fiends is a pretty good deal because all of them add evil damage on every attack, and it can help you against harm and a bunch of pretty dangerous, like high level necromancy things that do negative damage. But and harm is a first level spell, but it's certainly true that fire and cold come up a lot. Acid and electricity next most, and force and sonic are very unusual to come up, although when they do and you have resistance to it, the person who does force damage is usually like expecting, oh, nobody's gonna resist my magic missile or force damage, and like, what, you resisted 20 against my force damage?
Yeah, T4 Doubles in chat is saying force resistance can make magic missiles useless, which is making me reconsider how valuable that first one is. The Harmonic Oscillator. Some great names, by the way, in a lot of the options for the Inventor.
It's definitely the case that, like, if I was going to do it purely mechanically, not story-wise, based on which ones come up, and I was like, I don't care that it makes sense that you can invent thermal insulation that protects you from both temperature extremes. I just want to put these together with things that are not as common if they're more common. I'm going to do fire and sonic because sonic's not very common and fire is more common. I could have done that, but I decided to go with things that I could justify with bad science. And
I will also point out, as somebody who has tried to, insulate for soundproofing, studio spaces, those often make you more susceptible to fire.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, next up, we've got the Construct Innovation, which I think is the most popular one. It is the one that the Iconic comes with. Oh, we didn't talk about the Iconic. All right, we'll finish Innovations, then we'll go back to the Iconic. So what makes the Construct Innovation better than, or different than other companions you can get? What makes it a fun innovation for the Inventor?
Explodes.
So, I mean, the Construct is cool because you have a separate character that's coming around with you. Also, because of the number of benefits you can add onto it, really will allow it to have a lot of damage that can eventually potentially get piled up, especially if you do well with overdrive. That is a lot more than most of the animal companions can put out. It's a little less accurate at very high levels than the animal companion, but it also doesn't have to worry about it's a little simplified because it has extra innovation abilities, which means you don't have to look for like, do the rules work differently if I'm writing it or not? Like they do with animal companions, where they kind of have to have the mounts trait or you lose certain stuff. Well, the constructs don't have to worry about that because they don't have those things to begin with. So you can just ride them confidently and know that it's going to work the same no matter what. You can throw on some fun things like turning into a wall at a higher level. That was one of Mike's ideas where he's like, what if the construct could turn into a wall? And I said, that's going on the list of things that the construct can do. But just having a pet, having a friend who is there to help you out as an extra character is really popular with a lot of people, really unpopular with some other people. And so having the option and making it balanced with the other options is very important for the class.
I also really like how it sets itself apart from a lot of the other companions, that you can do the Batman thing with it, where you can, if you research what you're going up against, you can customize this thing to be very good at what you're going into. And also because the Inventor gets to kind of on the fly just reconfigure its stuff. Like, if you could be surprised, like, oh, the white dragon wasn't an ice dragon, it was a zombie dragon. Well, let me reconfigure my robot to be anti-zombie dragon right now. It's very good at being very good at what you need it to do at the moment. And not a lot of the other companions can do that.
Yeah, if you have some of those abilities, especially there's some higher level stuff to just use an interact action and switch around some extra energy damage that you're throwing on. And that would be very, very helpful in terms of what you were saying there. It's like, oh no, I'm facing something that's weak against fire. Good thing I spent one action and changed my damage and my robot's damage to fire damage. Now we're throwing on that extra weakness.
There's a reason I mentioned the Inventor being like such a great class for just always being able to hit that weakness on an opponent. It's real good at it.
Oh,
this
yes.
is also the perfect class for that player in your group that's always coming up with this like weird, wacky solutions to the problems in the game. Like, what if I take this crystal and I focus an ever-burning torch through it? And like, we've got the class for you right over here.
Oh, yeah. And there are plenty of places where you get to just describe a weird thing that you're doing. In one case, you are forced to describe some weird invention that you pull out that lets you use your crafting to defend yourself from an attack instead of your AC. And with just a ridiculous example of what kind of device that you had. You failed to account for this, where it's like, the shocker lizard tried to use a shock strike, but you pull out a specially grounded lightning rod from that time you tried to power an invention by harnessing a thunderstorm, and then that sort of takes the shock strike into it.
Finally, we've got the weapon. So what makes an inventor's weapon innovation better than just the run-of-the-mill weapon options that are out there, like guns?
Well, I mean, it could be a gun, but it would have to be a gun of an appropriate level, at least for now, although people have suggested an option to go in there and potentially allow a higher level base weapon to be part of your weapons in a limited way. In the playtest forums, I put that down to look at that. But you can put on some extra traits that your weapon normally doesn't have, which can not only help you sort of linearly in terms of just stacking more traits on, but it can help you with combinations that usually are better than the sum of their parts that we normally might not even allow on weapons if you're not an inventor. So, for example, let's see. I think that there is a breakthrough innovation that can give you let's see. So you can get sweep, for example, on your weapon, and you can get forceful on your weapon. And we usually don't put forceful on an agile weapon because of the fact that it does more and more damage with your later attacks, and agile weapons make it so you're really, really accurate with your later attacks. And we could do it, but it would like cost more of the weapon's budget than expected. But here, we don't know if you're putting it on an agile weapon. You can just put it on an agile weapon if you want. You can get extra runes onto your weapon at very high levels and just throw different traits on that you can combine. I've seen people playtest forms that are combining on extra reach for their weapon with some ability to grapple and trip enemies before the enemies can get in close.
Also, the inventor like definitely is letting me feel a whole lot of both the mechanic and depending on spec Technomancer characters from Starfinder, and the Technomancer has a junk sword build that gets to do a lot of this sort of stuff, and it's so much fun to just like transform your weapon to have the perfect ability you need it to have right now.
It's always helpful to have just the right ability for the situation.
Mm-hmm.
So we did say we were going to go back up quickly to the iconic. People in chat were debating whether it is an orc or a half orc. I saw Wayne Reynolds comment that it was definitely a half orc. He's got this cool prosthetic arm that doesn't seem like it's represented by any of the rules. It's just a cool detail, unless I'm not interpreting a rule in a certain way.
I mean, it's not part represented of the rules by classes.
Okay. Oh.
I was gonna say not part of the rules yet.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
So we were coming at it a very similar way. Yeah, it's not part of the inventor class, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be in the book.
And I think most people, as much as people might like the design of the inventor, most people are going nuts for his little goblinoid construct. Gobladroid.
Yeah. I call him Gobbot.
You didn't go with Gobot?
I mean, it's basically Gobot with two B's.
Yeah. I felt like if you say it Gobot, nobody gets it. But as soon as you say Gobbot, it just, it locks in. And it's the same thing. You're pointing at the same joke.
Mm-hmm.
Also, like, it's clear he's got the toolbox, toolkit, whatever the integrated kit feat from first level is. Anyway, Wayne Reynolds' art is amazing, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it in
He's got the built-in tools, right, built into the Gobbot, so that he can.
Based on that chest piece, I'm pretty sure it's coal-powered.
You never know. It could be powered based on some weird fantasy substance that is like coal, but more likely to explode.
Magical.
I can assure you, coal can explode.
Oh yes, coal is very likely to explode, but this may be even more likely to explode.
It's cold.
After all, you can explode like every 10 minutes as long as you keep adjusting it.
Oh, also, I think we focused a little bit too hard on just the inventions, the main inventions that you get to, the innovations rather. But like the whole class is like, it's not just you have this one cool idea. You get to like improv that you're basically just covered with thousands of little like one-off super useful inventions that you might have just invented for that very moment that you rolled that dice right now, and then it's something completely different next time. Some
of the feats do that. Mm-hmm. Also, as we've mentioned on the forums in a few places, the final book is going to have some like little invention-y items, and we're probably going to put in a feat chain, kind of like how, you know, how rangers can get snares if they take the right feats and they get a few snares. There could be like a set of feats that let you, for example, pick up those invention items and start crafting some of those in addition to all of this cool stuff that you have for the inventor. And there's a question about that on the survey as well, in case people want to weaken the inventor's martial abilities to like build in more of the some number or more of those little invention-y items. We left them out of the playtest because it's just too much to playtest, like to write for a playtest to balance, and then you're like, you need like what, 40, like 2 per level at least or something for the playtest, and then you find out that invention number 32 is overpowered, and that throws off the entire playtest of the inventor because it's like everybody's just spamming invention number 32. It busted every encounter. The inventor must be overpowered, and we didn't. It's like, well, what about the chassis and the innovations and any of those things? It's like, well, no, invention number 32 healed for 100 damage at level 3 due to a mistake or something like that. So we didn't want that to be the focus and to be so overwhelming. So we just didn't put it in the playtest, and it's going to be in the final.
So my question, especially with the weapon-based one, and it's going for a classic archetype, is siege weaponry an option?
I would say that siege weapons are not probably going to be listed as weapons in a way that allows you to use them with a variety of like special abilities that say a weapon. I'm sure that if we have siege weapons in there, that they will specify what works with them, because we don't want like you can draw into your hand any weapon and be like, oh, that means I can get a 500-pound cannon into my hand, or like the World Breaker giant like 1,000-foot long gun or whatever it is into my hand because it says any weapon. So I'm sure that it'll parse out to make sure that it's clear that things that are just like a weapon don't necessarily apply to a giant siege engine.
Well, in the Pathfinder Guns and Gears bullet points, siege engines are listed with vehicles, not with gear, which brings me to vehicle inventor.
I mean, there could be a vehicle inventor, but that sounds to me like an expansion innovation that shouldn't be necessarily where the core class puts a lot of its focus into, because of the fact that vehicles are something that show up heavily in a smaller subset of games. They have rules that are a little bit complex. They tend to be very disruptive a reasonable percentage of the time, but also super cool. And so if we put it directly into the inventor in its first incarnation, it probably lowers the chance that that the inventor gets adopted in its first incarnation. So that sounds like a good thing to put in somewhere where there's even more vehicle support with like an extra vehicle innovation or something like that.
Or you just really lean into the armor. I'm picturing, do you remember the Marauders from the 90s X-Men? How there was the guy who had like tank treads for his lower body.
Oh yeah, armor can definitely help you. It's got some movement-based abilities in there for sure.
You can wear your horse. That's what I'm thinking. As tank treads. So one of the things that surprised me about this class, because when I was first skimming through it, usually what I do is read the first couple of unique class features to the class and then just scroll right down to the feats, because I don't need to know when my perception goes up, but there's actually a lot of class features that are peppered all through it, and they're really interesting, they're really fun, and they add a lot to the class. They add a lot of gusto. So offensive boost, overload, the breakthrough armor modification, breakthrough innovation. It just feels like every couple of levels, not only are you getting your regular boost that you expect at those levels, but you're also getting something unique to the class.
You get a ton, and it may seem like it's a lot at first. It's like, wow, this is a lot, and it goes beyond proficiency. But part of that is because of the fact that sort of its budget for types of things that it can do is divided among a lot of different features. This can mean that some people look at it like, wow, it gets so much. And other people are like, oh, each individual one is a smaller choice than, say, like Barbarian Rage, where it's like, okay, my Barbarian's Rage can eventually do like a dozen additional bonus damage or whatever at higher levels. But it's also where a lot of the budget is for like some of my extra features is in that extremely high damaging range, whereas offensive boost is 3.5 damage. Well, that's only a portion of it. We can keep having some cool extra things. So that was definitely, Ryan, that was exactly my intent, was to wind up in a situation where the inventor could have a lot of different things that you get, and it's divided among them so that you feel like you're getting more different options.
It's also a lot of the options are about changing previous choices you've made with the earlier options. Like, it is a lot of customizing some of the things you've made. So when you have an option, when you have a class feature with options in it, it's not always take this option and it's permanently applied to your character. It's this is your option for now.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you're an inventor. You're always tinkering and trying, changing and innovating, and who knows what you're going to do this time.
All right, so getting to the class features. The class feats.
Mm-hmm.
How would you categorize the direction you went with the feats that you were adding here?
I think I went a few different directions, but one of them was definitely very mad science, with a lot of there are statements in here like they told you there was no way that explosions could heal people, but they were fools. Fools who didn't understand your brilliance.
Searing Restoration. It's a second level feat. Oh my god.
That's right. And also, no, I created you, which is a name that Eleanor came up with after hearing some of the random things that I put into some of these feats. So she's like, well, there has to be a no, I created you feat. And I was like, okay, it'll be a reaction for the construct companion that helps you try to keep control of it. And that's how it got in there. So it's definitely got some very mad sciencey lines and things that it likes to go with in the feats. But there's a few different directions. There are things that you can boost your innovations. You can work together with your offensive boost. You can help your allies a lot. There's some feats on that. There are ways to get more unstable abilities so that you can have even more different ways to make your innovation potentially go wrong. And then there are just some very strong high-level abilities that don't necessarily fit completely into any of those categories, like full automation, where I guess that's related to your innovation, where some part of your innovation is automated and gives you a quick into action that can do something for you.
I'm also impressed. A lot of these are not directly connected to your innovation. A lot of them are, here's the concept, here's how it applies to you based on your innovation.
Mm-hmm. Just like what you mentioned with the Gunslinger, we'd rather give you more feats that you can take with more different characters rather than having too many of them siloed based on your innovation. Obviously, with innovations that are as different as armor, weapon, and construct, that's harder to do with the Inventor than it is with the Gunslinger, where there's more similarity between a big snipey gun and a pistol than there is between a gun and an armor and a construct. But we do try to make it
suit a full plate.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah. So
both
we do
classes.
Sorry, I was just saying we do try to make it so that you have more options. If you can find a way to fit it, we want it to fit for you.
I mean, both options pass one of the rubrics I use for, like, when I'm reviewing classes for games. It's that at every level, when I was building these sample characters, I was struggling to pick the one I wanted the most and wishing I had more feat choices.
Awesome.
And when that happens, then I know that's a well-designed class.
So I had a similar feeling, and also anytime I got access to a new level of feats, I didn't just want to go back to get the ones that I liked from previous level. Suddenly I had even more, shiny new toys that I absolutely had to play with.
And this means it means I want to go back and make more inventors, more gunslingers. Like I've made so many Pathfinder fighters, second edition fighters. Gunslingers and inventors are going to be just like that for me, where I'm going to have like 5 or 6 in PFS just because I want to do different builds.
There's some that I want to try out too. Like there's some that are just fun, and I'm like, I don't know how many times I'm going to need to have the ability to bounce my Gigavolt off of a bunch of walls and just create all of these lines that hit everything. But I just kind of really want to see it a few times and just enjoy how easy it is to target all of my enemies with a giant line that I'm bouncing off of everything.
Now, one thing I did do when I was picking my feats is that I would often be like, oh yeah, that's absolutely the one I'm taking. And it's like, wait a second. Is it unstable? Most of the time, yes. And there's only so many unstable feats I think I should be taking.
Which is all of them. You should
Every
have all
other
of
level I should take an unstable
Yeah,
feat.
I would say probably, you probably don't want more than 1 or 2 feet that is, in addition to your starting explosion, is unstable most likely, although there's some that are like follow-up feats to an unstable, right? Like Gigavolt follows up to Megavolt, so that's okay. It's not adding another unstable thing. It's just making your previous unstable thing really awesome. Or Gigaton Strike off of Megaton Strike.
Now you're putting the ethics board in mad science and ruining everything.
I mean, you could take all unstable feats if you want. I'm definitely not going to stop you. And in fact, I will actually facilitate you by when we change unstable to be the thing that blows you up more, but works more often. Because then you'll be able to use multiple different kinds.
I want to be forced to order or paint up 2 different versions of my characters. One's normal and one covered in soot.
That's fair.
I mean, soot washes off.
A good idea.
Sit there with a jar of soot when you're playing your inventor.
I feel like if you ever order character art and you're playing an inventor with like a companion, you need 2 pieces. One where the companion is like all happy and shiny and right next to you, and one where it's like there's just kind of half of its head and torso left, right? And there's a broad scorch mark.
Oh no.
Even though
I haven't been this excited about a book
Innovator,
in a long
there was
time.
one construct. Where's the one that lets you just program your construct and let him go? He could take 1 action around.
So there's 2 things like that. One of them is the Advanced Construct Companion, which is similar to Advanced Animal Companions. It can take 1 action, even if you let it go. And then at 20th level, with full automation, you can just automatically get an action to do a full command where it can still take both of its actions, and you still get all 3 of your actions. So it goes up at 4th, and then at 20th, it's just like, oh yeah, this is just a separate character that's going to do its thing, and it doesn't take any of my actions to do it. I still have all 3.
One thing I noticed when I was making my character and I was choosing backgrounds, I didn't want to take the Tinkerer background, but if I didn't take it, I didn't have engineering lore. Is there any way that engineering lore, I know lore isn't usually associated with class, but it feels like it's something this class is missing.
Well, if you want engineering lore, you can take it with your 3+ intelligence skills, or other than that, the crafting skill actually comes with a degree of some of the same information that you would get in engineering lore. There, you can recall knowledge off of crafting. I know that it was not exactly a knowledge category in Pathfinder 1st edition, although knowledge engineering sort of was a category, but the crafting skill has recall knowledge. It's not going to be as low of a DC for a task that's specifically engineering as if you had engineering lore, because it's more specific. But like if you look on monster identification, like constructs and certain other topics like that are listed in the recall knowledge for crafting. So you're good to go with the fact that you're already trained in crafting. And if you want to be even more into engineering or anything in particular, then take it as one of your skills. If you want, get additional lore feat, or be a tinker if you want to do that.
Okay, so I don't have to feel like I'm missing out on the obvious if I'm not taking the Tinkerer background.
That's right. Because as long as you just keep putting up your crafting, you're going to be able to answer engineering-based questions by rolling crafting. It won't be as low of a DC. Your GM should probably set it a little lower with engineering lore. So it's sort of a little advantage if you took that too. But it still is going to get you where you need to go.
All right. Then I am sticking to Feral Child.
All right. Wait, is your GM allowing Feral Child?
My GM is Luis. I ran it past him and he allowed it.
Okay. Oh, well, Luis is a nice guy. He allows a lot of things.
In fact, he said, as long as you're not so feral that you don't use guns or inventions.
Yeah, that would be great. It would be like you just don't use guns or inventions at all. And then you're like, this playtest was so weird. I didn't feel like an inventor at all. I didn't have any inventions. And
I feel like I've seen this character. Isn't there an episode of DuckTales where Bubba gets a hold of Gizmo Duck's armor? Because I feel like that's what's being described right now.
Oh, gosh.
I mean, you've also seen the character because I've been showing off the action figure that it's based on, my King Shark with the shark-based mech.
Oh, I know. I even specifically mentioned on Facebook that if he's not actively moving his mouth when you're trying
he'll
to
be actively moving his mouth when I'm role-playing him.
He has to.
Yeah, I am super excited to be playing this character. I was worried when I got stuck with when I thought I was stuck with the armor innovation that I would be all defensive and just going around with a regular weapon, but I like that I get weapons built into my armor, or I can use my armor to enhance my weapons.
Definitely.
I at one point I was thinking my theme is just I'm Iron Man but a shark.
I think Iron Man could be a shark.
I mean, he's a business.
That's probably the quote to take out of context from this entire interview. Is I think Iron Man could be a shark.
Oh no, there is a Param line that, taken out of context, is the greatest line he's ever said, and I'll tell him about it later.
Oh, okay, later.
Because it should not be repeated on the air, not on purpose.
Oh boy,
I've said too much.
Now people are going to comb through until they find it.
You know what? Then we'll talk about it in our after show for our patrons. So if you are that curious,
there you go.
You got to throw us $5 on our Patreon. All right, going to our questions from chats. T for Goblins. Will Alkenstar inventors have access to guns as they literally invented them?
I can actually answer that in that it literally says that in the playtest right now.
Yeah, I was like, that's in there.
Yeah, we can use the word literally too.
All right, T for Goblins. What's the name of the iconic? I assume we don't know yet. Oh, or maybe you do and you're not telling us.
Oh, so I know
they haven't been fully decided.
Yeah, well, I know who the iconic inventor is because Mark Moreland needed that answer from me early, but that's about as much as I'm gonna say there. I have no idea about the Gunslinger though, because that is a matter of we won't know it until we find the right person to write it. So.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Jaina B, could we do a Green Arrow Hawkeye type character as an inventor with an inventory of arrows, like trick arrows, as their innovation weapon?
I could see that. If you want to do that, my recommendation is if you inventor into Eldridge Archer, in particular, right? And with the final version of the class, you would be able to get some gadgets that are just gadgets, but Eldridge Archer has that feat that lets you get an unlimited number of super low level consumable arrows. So that way you can have your Green Arrow feel of, oh yeah, I'm always doing these weird trick arrows every shot. If you don't do that, you can just buy a nearly unlimited number of low level trick arrows at higher levels just based on the way that money and pricing works.
Are boxing glove arrows already in the game?
Are they already in the game? I don't think boxing glove arrows are, but there are other trick arrows. There are other trick arrows, though.
Ediweir is quoting the r/Pathfinder_RPG Reddit subforum, saying users brought up that the inventor feels too much like Tony Stark and not enough like Inspector Gadget. So what would you say to them?
I would say that I already said that we're probably going to add more gizmos as a feat option. But if you really, really want to take down the martial capacity of the class and put in lots and lots of gizmos. Like think Alchemist, right? Where it has so many of these temporary items that it makes each day that it takes up enough of the class that it doesn't go up to master and weapons, for example. There is an option on the poll where you can vote for that. So if you want the class to be like super full of gadgets to the extent that Alchemist is with their alchemical devices, then that's on there. There's one sort of in between where it weakens it somewhat mechanically to build in the gadgets so that everyone uses them. And then there's the stick with the playtest idea where you don't have to do that that gadget theme, which can be better for newer players to not be forced to do it because it is pretty complicated and sends you to another section of the book, but that you can easily feed into it and pick up a few. And you can go on the survey and pick which one sounds best to you.
Now, I will have this is my one concern with the Inventor, besides the gleeful cackling I did over it. Are you worried that it is going to be a little bit too complicated? It definitely is on the higher end of the complicated characters of the.
I definitely
classes.
would be worried if it had built-in gadgets. That like, let's be clear with that. That's part of the reason why it mentions that it's going to lose like a fair amount of its stuff if it has built-in gadgets. So you'll be able to opt into the complication if the gadgets are in feats, due to the fact that the gadgets are in feats, and you just don't pick it if you don't want to get too complicated. But yeah, I think that you would be capable of making an inventor that's very, very complicated if you choose the gadget feats, but you're not forced to do that, and that would allow players who really want to get into more complication to build a character like that, and players who don't want to get too complicated to not be forced into it.
So we have gone a little longer than we expected to. I know you both talked about ending off with an unrelated book. Did you still want to talk about that, or do we just not have time for this to make it a proper
It sounds
tease?
like we don't have time to talk a little bit, just drop a few things about anything else, just because we're already 15 minutes past where you guys want it to be, and Mike, I think, even more so. So
yeah. All right. So sorry about that. We will we'll just say then Guns and Gears, it's coming out in September, which that's only a couple of months after the Secrets of Magic. Those two books are coming out one after the other, basically, both on either side of Gen Con, which is a surprise.
It is a thing that we're doing, and that perhaps we will never do again.
You are crazy.
For now
this might not be as bad as when you all made 10 classes in the same book, but
but neither of us was at Paizo at that time, so we didn't have to do that.
That's true.
All right. I was at Paizo by the time you had Advanced Class Guide in your hands, but I wasn't at Paizo by the time they were actually doing Advanced Class Guide. I was part of the playtest, actually. I did a lot on a few of the classes of like playtesting and posting.
All right. Well, remind people how they can participate in the playtest, and especially where they can find the surveys.
So you can just basically go on Paizo.com. There's a super easy download. You don't even have to like make an account or do any of that. You can just go on to downloads.paizo.com. Let me see if there's a link to our site. Like, it's there, and download the playtest. Then at that point, play it, talk about it. You can use the Paizo.com forums or just anywhere else that you want to talk about it. And then go into the surveys, which does anyone have a handy link for here they are. There is the class survey, and then there is the open response survey. That's where you can just type whatever you want. There we go. So be sure, if you can, to play test the classes, especially the Inventor, which is brand new, because we just don't know what it's like, and we just want to get more playtest feedback from people who have built and played and run. And I love Theorycraft feedback too. I'm using it. Keep giving us that, but I really, really would like more playtest feedback if you can.
And speaking of playtests, we'll be doing a live playtest next week for our audience. You will want to be able to check that out.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that in the banter segment, or sorry, in the shout out segment. But right now we have to transition out of here into the new segment. So once again, Mike, Mark, thank you both for coming on here. We'll be talking to you again soon, I suspect, because there's a lot of interesting things coming out from Paizo in 2021.
All right.
All right. Thanks so much for having us.
Excellent.
Bye.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
This. Param remuted.
And we're back.
In the Pathfinder news segment, we talk about all the latest happenings for the Pathfinder role-playing game from Paizo, from third-party publishers, from licensees, anything that is of interest to you, the Pathfinder fan, we try and cover it here. We've got a couple of licensees starting things off. The Adventurers Curated Dice Collection by Level Up Dice. Param, have you checked out this Kickstarter that launched last week?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. They're going to curate a special set of dice for your character.
Yes, so they actually reached out to us, and we have some kind of partnership with them, although we won't be going into the details of that. But just full disclosure, we do have a partnership in promotion of this, but it was more a review copy of what these dice will be. But similar to what Beetle and Grimm's was doing with one of their Kickstarter stretch goals or add-ons, these are specifically curated dice for your character. They are Paizo licensed, and they are customizable in multiple ways. First of all, they will give you the dice loadout, like the specific number of dice of each different, polyhedral that fits your character. And for us specifically, oh no, I just said we're not going to go into the details because I didn't get that approved. So that is one of the ways that they're doing it. Another way is that you can customize the colors and the graphics that are on them, so that if you're playing wizard, you can get wizard runes, wizard icons all throughout the dice. And let's say you're a magic wizard, obviously you're a magic wizard, a magic missile specialist, you can load up on your D4s. And this is Level Up Dice, which is a company that's been producing high-end dice for a long time, and they come highly recommended by Lauren and by a few other people on the network that have purchased their things. So the Kickstarter just launched. It's going for another 28 days, and it has already funded.
Yeah, not a surprise there. It's really cool idea. I'm surprised nobody came up with it earlier.
And I would spend a little more time talking about it because I do think it's really cool. And when they were explaining the concept before they had launched the Kickstarter, I was on board. Like, had they not reached out to us, this is something we'd be covering on the news anyway and talking up how cool the idea is. But because the episode's gone a little bit long, I do want to get to all the other news items. So just that's something out there. It's a new licensee, and it is a very cool concept. So boom, there's the link in chat. The next one, this is a cool thing that you found, Param, and shared with me and with the with our newsroom. Behind the Iconics. So Wayne Reynolds, the designer of the Iconics, is the artist for a lot of the covers, if not all of the covers for the hardcovers of the Pathfinder lines for 2 editions now. He is just doing his designer notes. He is going iconic by iconic, talking about some of the decisions he made, what was going into it, what some of the changes that were made along the way, and it is fascinating. I believe Eric Mona, I've heard him say that if you ever get a chance to just stand next to Wayne Reynolds and ask him a question, if you could just point to any detail on any iconic that he's ever drawn and be like, what's up with that? He will have a story. He will have the historical and cultural significance from Earth that it's based on, why that is most appropriate for the Galarian version of it, why it's appropriate for that class. And we are seeing that on display. He's already done 3 of the Iconics. Done Valeros, Sayone, and Micheal. He did, I believe, today. And these are fascinating reads, and they include some different early versions of some of the characters sometimes, but also like they go a lot further than you might think. Like Micheal, when he was talking about her design, there was no Pathfinder elves yet when he designed Micheal. So not only was he making decisions about what the rogue would look like, it was like, what would elves look like in this new fantasy world?
Yeah, and elves themselves, they went through quite a bit of transformation in design choices, even in official art. If you look at some of the beta pictures they had these like massive, almost World of Warcraft ears and anime perspectives, and then there's Wayne's take on the elves that are these like almost alien creatures. It's there's a reason that I've wanted to have a Wayne Reynolds just dedicated interview show on the network for years now, but it's so hard. We've just had a hard time lining up the time zone differences because he lives in Australia.
Does he live in Australia? I thought he lived in England.
I might have that wrong.
Oh, I really enjoyed reading over the Sayone one where he was talking about like these are the clothes that he chose so that he could show off the tattoo idea that he had, and then when he turned it over and it was she was personified as being from Varisia, he's like, well, that's not the right culture, or that's not the right climate at all for what she's wearing. And he kind of talked about some things that had he known that, he would have made these other changes. And those are some of that's the reason why Sayone has a more comfortable looking wardrobe in second edition, where she's added some layers on that still show off her tattoos, but still cover her up to the climate.
Right. Yeah, it is. If you ever get a chance to speak with him at a convention, especially, do take the time to have that conversation. It is glorious.
And he is also very good about answering people's questions and replying to their comments, which is how I knew that the iconic Inventor was a half-orc and not an orc, which I mentioned earlier. He's just a nice guy to deal with. He is a student of history and of all of the different things that you are dealing with in the setting. Like, he's not just a talented artist. He is such a smart, educated artist, perfectly in line with the path. Like, there's a reason that he has defined the look of Pathfinder. Oh, no, there was one other thing I wanted to bring attention to that he said about Sayone. He was talking about her casting and how hers is a rougher edge. Whereas, so anytime you see a character casting in Pathfinder, it looks like they've drawn some kind of energy symbol, and that's like usually floating around their hand or whatnot. And he was talking about the hard edge around hers, and he gave a specific name for what he calls it, and I'd never seen that named before. So I am on the Sayone page right now, just trying to find. No, that's the
right. In fact, it's one of my favorite things about Magic in Pathfinder is they very clearly show what it looks like when you're casting spells and why you don't do it in secret. Why it's really hard to stealth cast spells, because these giant glowing runes start surrounding you when you start doing it.
Yeah, keep talking because I haven't found it yet, and
But so like hers is like a harsher edge because she's a sorcerer as opposed to Ezrin.
Yeah. So Ezrin. The idea is that Ezrin has studied how to do that, whereas she just does it and it just happens to work for her. So it was a design choice based on the mechanics and how the two intertwine.
We have a wonderful comment.
Spell signatures. So apparently those glyphs and whatnot that emanate from a caster's hands whenever they cast spells in Pathfinder art, they're called spell signatures, which I think is such a cool name, and I've never heard the term before.
Right. That needs to be.
Sheppy is in chat saying that he owes his career to that man. If you can go into details about that, Sheppy, I would love to know what you mean by that.
And for those of you who do not know who Sheppy is, T.S. Rodriguez, he is an amazing artist who's worked on Pathfinder products and other industry fantasy products all over. Amazing artist, and also has done a fair bit of art for our podcasts.
Including V just posted a preview of art that he made for her, and it is stunning.
Oh my gosh, it is wonderful.
Elf Taro wants the Shark Sassa art. I mean, I've got the action figure. I was just going to take a picture of him and use that for his token, but it's always good to have an excuse to ask Sheppy for more art.
Always happy to see. Also, one of the things we've said about Sheppy before, Sheppy's sketches look like a lot of artists' finished pieces. It's kind of amazing the detail that Sheppy puts into everything. I just love it.
Oh, and Sheppy saying he saw his first illustrations on the bestiary for D&D 3.0, and that is when he decided to take art seriously. That is very cool. Thanks for sharing that, Sheppy.
Speaking of one of my favorite Wayne Reynolds pieces is a cover. I forget which episode of Dungeon it is, but it was during the Paizo run, where it is a thief pointing a hand crossbow with a chamber on it up at while descending from a tower. It was one of the most influential pieces of art, and one of the reasons I first started collecting Dragon magazine when I saw that cover, and one of the reasons I became a Paizo fan.
Oh wow, cool. Did you ever pick up the Art of War, the Wayne Reynolds, the coffee table book? I did not, and I regret it. Just reading over these things that he's been posting, it's made me want to go pick that book up.
I regret not getting the special cover.
Oh, I didn't even know about the special cover. Was that pre-order limited or something?
I don't know. I saw it at the convention.
All right. Well, while you're looking that up, next bit of news. This is, I think, fun and important, but it's quick. It is that Pathbuilder digital character sheets are now PFS legal.
Oh,
so when
so
you
wonderful.
are playing Pathfinder Society, you need a legal character sheet. And Pathbuilder is an app for building second edition characters. There's also the first
edition and Starfinder now. So everything you would be a fan of, they've got an app for. It's free and it's amazingly good. It's for Android devices. You can run it using Android emulator on your PC. It is maybe the best character creation software available for Pathfinder 2, especially. It's just so great, and there's like a one-time optional buy-in you do that can unlock a little few extra features and get rid of the ads. It's ad supported by default, and it's like $5 to unlock everything and not have the ads. So I immediately threw that $5 at them. We have a video on our channel, our YouTube channel, where I break down Pathbuilder and all its feature set and why it's really great.
Yeah, now that I know there's a Starfinder one, I will probably pick it up and throw the $5 on it, even if I don't know if I'll ever use it in an official game. So yeah, that was exciting. I don't know if they've come up with any kind of deal or if it was just Paizo accepting that Pathbuilder is that integrated into second edition character building that it just kind of gets an honorary mention and official status. Because there's only 2 digital character sheets that are currently sanctioned for Pathfinder Society: Pathbuilder and Hero Lab. And Hero Lab is a licensee.
I mean, I can't, like, all of my players use Pathbuilder at this point, like all of them.
Yeah. Any of my players, well, if I had players, I would definitely recommend that they do it and that they buy it, because one of the perks is more exporting options. And I like having the option to print out your character sheets. Oh, King of Rock says you can still get the special cover of the Wayne Reynolds, The Art of War. War being Wayne Reynolds' initials.
Ooh,
you still get it at Paizo. I think
fantastic.
We'll both be placing orders for that book as soon as the Paizo website is up. This was not a news item, but since I just saw that Folkland shared it in chat, Paizo said on Twitter, "We are hard at work replacing some hardware, and we'll let everyone know when things are back in working order. But in the meantime, website function will be impaired." So the website's actually working, but you cannot sign in, which means you cannot access your digital content. And you cannot place more orders.
Well, when we were setting up for the episode, I kind of had a little bit of a panic attack when I couldn't download a fresh copy of the PDF, and I was so glad I had one already downloaded.
Okay, and Luis is saying that you can sign in now, that the site is back up.
Yay! You know what's been working this whole time, Ryan?
Archives of Nethys?
Yes, and they've got a brand new player page for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and it's a cool little resource. I really like it. I'm pulling it up on screen right now.
Yeah, it is the how to play section. It is talking about character creation. It is talking about game mastery, and it just curates the rules that if you are new to Pathfinder or new to role-playing games, then Archives of Nethys can be daunting since it has all of the rules. And so just having this section of just being like, start here. Let's help you out. Let's walk you through it.
And it's important to know that, like, one of the reasons that Pathfinder can be so successful is that, like, all that you need to technically play Pathfinder is available online for free. All the rules to make all the characters, you can go to Archive of Nethys, and it's an officially supported site that has all the rules of the game. And having a good, fresh, easy to use entry point is just going to help grow the player base. And yeah, it will help when more of these players, as they're able to, you know, buy the books, and they're going to want to, because there's content that's in the books that aren't, like, especially the rich vastness of the flavor of the world, this amazing art. It's nice having a printed copy at the table for those of you who still like print, like me. But a lot of players need this. And when I was a tiny little, like, high school nerd, and, like, saving up for a rule book was like months of saving just to go get one at the hobby store that I would be lucky to be able to get to here in rural Kentucky. Having a website like this back then would have made the difference between me being able to participate in the hobby and not being able to play it.
One thing that I actually missed about the player's guide, the new player's guide, is that it starts with an introduction about what the Archives of Nethys even is. And I remember on our Discord, a new user joined and was asking some questions, and somebody shared a link to the Archives of Nethys, and he was like, "That doesn't look legal."
Oh,
and it's like, oh, I guess it's true. If you're not used to PRDs and having these online archives, you might look at this and think somebody is ripping off Paizo, not that they actually are a partner of Paizo's.
Yeah, like for those of you who may not know the history of Archive of Nethys, or some people that are new to it, originally Paizo hosted their own PRD. Archive of Nethys was one of the free PRDs. They were the community use version, whereas you have something like DFPFSRD, which is more a separate license, compatibility license, so it can't use all the names and stuff. Whereas Archive of Nethys was a nonprofit funded by donations, and now and instead of maintaining that database themselves now, Paizo, instead of keeping their own PRD, they're now licensing through, or there's some sort of partnership with Archives of Nethys, where they are the quote-unquote official PRD for Pathfinder now. Pathfinder, Starfinder, and Pathfinder 2nd Edition.
Final bit of news. Yeah, all right. I guess we might as well cover this since we're right about ready to wrap things up.
Yeah.
Is that Gen Con 2021 rather, is tentatively scheduled for August 5th to 8th, although they are acknowledging that there will be regular updates, keeping an eye on whether they can keep these dates. And I do wonder if they are in the same situation they were in last year, where for a while it was pretty obvious that they would have to cancel, but if they are the ones that cancel, they have to default on some insurance. And this is all speculation. Like, I know that that's a rule when you book a convention center. If you are the one that is canceling it, you default on things like down payments and whatnot. But if the city forces you to close it for things like a global pandemic, then it's on the insurance company. It's not on Gen Con to pay for the default.
And that was a struggle that a lot of conventions were facing last year. So this isn't a story unique to Gen Con. This was a story being told across the nation.
And so Gen Con has its dates, August 5th to 8th, and we will see what happens. Now, I'm in a different situation than usual in that even if Gen Con happens, if the border is closed, I cannot attend Gen Con. So I'll be watching both the Canadian government's updates on the status of the U.S.-Canada border and the status of Gen Con from Gen Con itself. All right, Param. Might as well throw in this one last bit of news that Raising Runelords in chat is saying, not really news yet, since he's barely started working on it, or they, but Fantasy Grounds has allowed them to start converting the Shattered Star Adventure Path, all 6 volumes, for their platform.
Fantastic! I mean, like, Fantasy Grounds is sort of one of the older in the tooth online ways to play, but it was always like the real premium options with fancy dice and all these things. And they've updated their engine over the years. And that was back in the day when you really had to have separate clients in order to pull this off. And they were always like the gold standard top back when they were out. They still produce a really great product. You can get it on Steam. And the more official support, the better. I mean, since I've started using official adventures on Roll20, one of the ones I'm using, it has made my life as GM so much easier to just have all the handouts, all the things, everything there. This is the part where I have to say Roll20 sponsors one of our shows. But it's having those pre-made adventures isn't just a silly use of money. Having all that stress of getting an online game, all that work done for me, makes me look forward to every game I do online instead of dreading the hours of setting it up that I would have to do normally when I'm doing an online game. And especially in the time of COVID, being able to take any amount of hours away from my prep work is worth the tiny amounts of money it takes to get them to do it.
Yeah, I had a similar experience when I was running Rise of the Runelords. Hero Lab had reached out to me and offered me a review copy of their then new preloaded adventure paths. They had all of the NPCs and stats in there so that you just had to go to the encounter based on the book. And I didn't have to do any of that prep, which, Param, you can imagine, I was very happy to not do, because I wouldn't have done it, and I would have had just a whole bunch of scrap papers and a lot of page flipping that they saved me. And it really did change it, and I don't think I could have gone back to running an adventure path without some kind of resource like that.
Mm-hmm.
We are ready to wrap things up, Param.
Yes.
We'll be right back with shoutouts right after this.
And we're back.
So this didn't come up, Param, but I am wearing my steampunk snuffleupagus in honor of Guns and Gears.
No, what was their innovation?
Steampunk snuffleupagus? I don't know, probably that jaunty hat.
I thought it was the imaginary companion that an imaginary companion would have.
Oh, but he wasn't imaginary.
I mean, he wasn't
real.
once it was revealed that they had to not have reasons for children not to trust their parents, but
yes,
he was originally imaginary. So shout outs. I have a shout out.
So thank you for joining us for episode 241 of No Direction, the No Direction Network's Pathfinder news, reviews, and interviews podcast. Thank you to Mark Seifter and Mike Sayre. Surprisingly similar names.
They have gestalted.
Yeah, I think that was an excellent interview, and we got a lot of new information, and there's just a lot of enthusiasm for this book. It's really exciting.
I mean, I'm like, this is so brilliant. Just to go back and praise the idea for this book, Golarion has always succeeded as a setting because of its weird mishmash, pulpy, like over the top roots, and I'm glad they're making this book that just embraces it wholehearted.
Yeah, so you know what? I have a backlog of the questions that were just about the book, and we never got to that. But one of them was a comment from Roskman saying they just want to say they appreciate that Pathfinder 2e is entering that getting weird stage of class design.
Mm-hmm. And Starfinder is one of my favorite games that Paizo also makes. And it's because they just embrace the weird. They recognize this is a game played by gamers. And it's a world that has all this opportunity for fun and mischief and just over-the-top wackiness while still being able to tell serious stories. And I'm glad to see that sort of attitude being taken for Pathfinder 2 as well.
Yeah, and it's funny just how much throwing the uncommon rarity onto those classes makes them so much easier to accept for everybody. Right. Like Gunslinger in first edition, where it's like, oh, I don't want gunslingers all over my fantasy. But in second edition, just being like, it's uncommon. They're out there. Yeah, it's not unheard of to see a gunslinger. But
you would talk about it at the bar that night.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, when your GM does let you play a gunslinger, it's going to feel that little bit more special.
Yeah. But this is the shout-out section, not just the talking about how cool that interview section was, although that interview was very cool. Yeah. So I have just a whole bunch of stuff that I want to shout out to, starting with some network shout-outs. So normally I've been doing either shout-out to one article or one podcast, but there's actually 3 shout-outs that I'm shouting out to here. 2 of them are thematically tied. So Legend Lore and Digital Divination, those are both are topical. One is a Pathfinder 2e, one of is a Starfinder podcast. One is hosted by Luis Loza and Lauren Sieg. One of them is by John Godek and Ron Lundeen. They both kind of had a New Year's is for new players theme to their first episode of the new year. So for Legend Lore, they were talking about introducing new players to Pathfinder, and it's the first of a 3-part series that they're doing on the topic. And then Digital Divination had a topic about how do you start a new character when you're rolling up a new character. And it was a fun conversation. And also one of the things that John and Ron do is they go right into current events. They talk about what's new in their lives, what's new in the world. And it's really gotten me to get to know them as personalities and not just as, the people that put out a podcast on my network. So both of those I think are valuable. And if you have fallen behind on your podcast listening, and I do not blame you if you have, I have as well. I think you can skip ahead to the most recent episodes of both of those podcasts. And it's just a good time to listen to those both. And then I also want to shout out to a blog, Burst of Insight by Andrew Marlowe. His latest installment is called Maintaining Creativity in a World Turned Upside Down. And it's short and it's just frank and honest and just saying that it is sometimes hard to keep creative when, you know, the world around you is in the state that it is in. And I just appreciate a good, honest read like that. Andrew is a very creative person, and Burst of Insight, the theme of his blog is really just like taking different systems and taking things you can learn from different systems and applying them to how you GM, regardless of the system. And yeah, it's really a lot about just infusing creativity in different areas of the hobby. And it's an area that he's admitting that he is struggling with sometimes, especially in the last year, and that it is okay to struggle, and it is okay to not be engaging with your hobby in the same way as you would be in 2019. Mm-hmm. I do want to make so at one point in the interview, Micheal Sayre was like, last year he would have said no to the Gunslinger. And it just made me think like, yeah, that's what 2020 does to you. All right, a couple more shout outs. We've got on Patreon, I have started going deeper into PF 2.KD design, just because recently it feels like PF 2.KD has expanded in its breadth a lot more than just you and I throwing some house rules that
there's a lot of in the channel. There's a lot about it. Yeah.
And so what I have done is I have dedicated to every week that I'm not going to post a private sanctum. I am going to be posting an update to PF 2.KD. And I started with a new house rule called Basic Attacks of Opportunity, which is just, if you're missing attacks of opportunity from first edition and you want to see what it's like to have attacks of opportunity as just something everyone has access to in second edition, here's the way to do it. It addresses the fact that then fighter is losing out on a major thing. So they got combat reflexes earlier, and then the combat reflexes feat became advanced combat reflexes, which gave them unlimited attacks of opportunity. Just one of the things that I really enjoyed about writing this particular house rule was realizing how well equipped second edition is for attacks of opportunity. You've got the manipulate trait and a very short list of other things that actually provoke attacks of opportunity. So it's a lot less paperwork, it's a lot less logistics to implement attacks of opportunity in second edition than it was in first edition. And it's just one of those areas. I mean, attacks of opportunity are still in second edition. It's just not as universally applied. So I threw up a PF 2.KD option about giving them to everybody and seeing how that plays out in your game.
One of the things I want to shout out is that I'll be a guest GM for Epidemic Con this year. I'll be running 3 games. The convention is going to be January 22nd through 24th. It's an online convention, obviously. You can sign up for some of the games on the Warhorn, and then signups will be going up soon for the Saturday games. The Saturday games, I think, are paid games organized through the convention. But the Warhorn games, I think that they're free. Anyway, I will be GMing 3 different games, 1 each night. I'll be doing PFS 2-00, the King and Thorn special. I will be doing PFS 2-09, the 7 Secrets of Decline Academy. And I also will be doing PFS 1-20, The Lost Legend on Sunday. If you want to play with me as a GM in one of these games, I'll be throwing that link in chat here and in the show notes. You will want to check that out and sign up, and I'll be happy to play with y'all.
And speaking of games you'll be playing, Luis in chat has reminded me of the shout out that we said we were going to mention earlier, and that is that we are doing another KD Plays / Explore and Encounter, because now I realize we've got 2 different names for the playtests that we run. We're going to be running a Guns and Gears playtest. So 6 members of the network are getting together, and each of us playing one way or one innovation of Gunslinger or Inventor. So all 6 classes are covered. It is an original adventure that I believe is written by Luis. It's definitely being run by Luis. And he has been hinting that he's got some fun in store for us. So I'm looking forward to that. It's always great to have Luis as a GM. One thing to note is that in this week's Recall Knowledge, which is a kind of like my editorial that we start the week with, I said that it would be this Saturday, which was the original plan. Plans had to change since that article was written, and actually I haven't updated, and I probably should. But we managed to find a night that works for everybody, and that is Monday, the 18th. We are going to be kicking it off at, I believe, 9 p.m. Eastern, so that would be 6 p.m. Pacific, and we're going to be running for a couple hours. 2 maybe 3 hours. And if we have time at the end, we'll be giving our impressions of how these classes play. I am very excited to be playing a Shark Folk Innovator.
I will be happily playing my Kobold Sniper.
That's what I forgot what your build was. Yes, a Kobold Sniper. Yeah, you're excited about it?
Yes. Because I figured, kobolds would love to be snipers. All those nice long corridors with like very closed shot alleys.
I mean, there's a lot of places to hide and rest your gun.
Right.
All right, I have 2 more shout. No, I have 3 more shout outs.
Oh, wow. We've got lots of shout outs.
I know. It's a big one. So this one, I actually somebody shared in our Discord, and that is that Dice Will Roll is releasing a new podcast called Chronicles of Worlds, and it will be a history podcast, but it's about the world of Golarion.
Ooh, I love this idea. And Dice Will Roll's a great podcast. This is a good crew to do it.
Yeah. So you remember Millie Narsted's Gnome on the Go, the classic segment where it was a travel show on No Direction, and it was terrible because I don't actually know a whole lot about Golarion lore, and I was just reading off the Pathfinder wiki page. So this is going to be that, but much better. People that know what they're talking about, and probably won't be doing a very high-pitched gnome voice.
I wonder if they'll let Millie do a guest appearance.
No, Millie.
Aww.
I mean, she's still around. You can rescue her in that adventure that we put out. So, I don't believe they have a release date yet. It was just an announcement that the podcast was coming, but that is something that I'm going to be glamming onto because it really has not been a subject that I've seen covered.
No, there's been a few good YouTube channels. I know Find the Path put out a short series like that, but nobody's really kept it up.
Chen in chat is asking for the Millie Narstead voice, so it's Millie Narstead, the Gnome on the Go. And 5 minutes of that voice was apparently not what people wanted to listen to. All right, a podcast shout out because Steven is in chat saying he's missing them. So this is a new podcast that I added. It is a spin-off of Freakonomics. It is called No Stupid Questions. And it is Stephen Dubner, who is the main host of Freakonomics, and Angela Duckworth, who is a researcher. And every episode is just dedicated to a single topic. And they just address it in the most basic terms, the most complex terms, and they have a good conversation about it. And I have enjoyed it quite a lot. It is great hearing intelligent people covering intelligent topics in any way possible. Like the No Stupid Questions slogan, like it's not just the title of the show, it really is the attitude that they have towards how they can address these topics, and it's appreciated.
I want to shout out to an anime that our listeners might appreciate. It is called Sleeping Princess in the Demon Castle. It is both going for the squee adorable route, but then subverting it into almost like it's still very G-rated, but it's like, wow, a princess can be a villain, can't she? Even while she's captive. And it is filled with gaming in-jokes, and you end up rooting for the villains throughout the whole series and also the princess. It is hilarious. It is fantastic. Go check it out. You can watch it for free on Crunchyroll. I love it, and it's a short series, 12 episodes, and as a gamer, you will appreciate how it plays with those cliches and subverts them.
So that is interesting. I've seen a lot of things of the princess giving her a lot more agency and making her the hero of the story. I have not seen the princess as the villain of the story.
Yeah, she is absolutely the villain of this story, and it is wonderful.
All right, finally, I want to shout out to Tipstagram, Tim Drake Hagar. He was running the No Direction fan Instagram account. He has fallen behind on his podcast, kind of like I already forgave people who are in that situation. And so what he was doing was every time we would post a new article or a new podcast, he would post about it on the Instagram. And what was nice is that it wasn't just the same hype that I was doing when I would post about them on Facebook. He would do his own interpretation. So it was cool for me to read his take on the things that we're putting out and what was leaving a lasting impression. But he's just fallen behind on the content. He's just not able to keep up with things. And he is handing the keys to that Instagram account over to me, which for the meantime, it's just going to be, I'm going to do what I do on Facebook, but I'm also going to do it on the Instagram account. But yeah, keep following it if Instagram is your preferred social media outlet. And if Tim ever is able to catch up on things or get back into the hobby as whole hog as he had been before, I will gladly give the keys back to him. But I really want to thank him for all the work that he was doing. It was cool having a fan-driven social media platform for us.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. You were awesome. You're still awesome. We look forward to more awesomeness from you.
All right. So, Param, I know that you are not feeling well. Are you up for a private sanctum?
Yeah, the fans deserve a private sanctum, so we will do it.
Okay.
For those of you who don't know, so definitely stick here. We have to thank our patrons. They are the only reason that this network is able to grow and expand and keep going as it's going. And if you want to become a patron of the network, we would really appreciate it. You can do so over at patreon.com/nodirection or clicking on the Patreon link at nodirectionpodcast.com. While you're there, you can also see our Discord link. And if you go there, you'll be able to join the chillest community for Pathfinder, Starfinder, and general nerdity. And as a patron, you especially will want to click on that link soon, because after every episode of No Direction, we do the after show, where we have a little bit of an after party with us and our patrons, and where we talk about whatever you all want us to talk about. It's a little bit of time for us to let our hair down, get a little peek behind the scenes, and just have a casual chat with each other and our fans. And it has become one of my favorite parts of the week.
It will probably be a little short tonight because we are ending later than usual and you are not feeling well, but we'll try and get a good 20-minute chat or so in there. We'll see what
my
we
voice
can do
is so hurt right now.
Oh, all right. Well, then we are going to wrap things up right now.
No,
until next time.
Party.
I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Param.
And if you want to find the path, you need no direction.